All right. I am Ben Burgis. This is Andrew from the Mindgasms channel, and who has been nice enough to host me there a couple times. And he asked if I'd seen this debate we're going to watch tonight. I said, well, I haven't, but if you want to come over here, we can do it as a Thursday night debate breakdown. These ones are usually pretty fun. So Andrew, you want to start us off and like give us a little context here. So, I guess first things first, who are these two people?
Well, I know a lot of people watching your channel probably know who Sam Seder is. He's a progressive, and he hosts the Majority Report. And then Larry Sharpe, I don't actually know very much about him at all, but he's a libertarian. And for me personally, I would say I'm probably somewhere between the two of them in terms of my political ideology. I don't really apply a political label to myself in particular, but I kind of tend to be left-leaning, I would say. But and I mean, full disclosure, I'm not really a big fan of Sam Seder, but I think that he often makes good arguments against libertarians in particular. I think that's the thing that he's best at. So yeah, I thought this debate was very interesting, and I thought it would be fun to get into.
Yeah, I am a fan of Sam. My politics are not exactly the same as his, so I think he would probably call himself something like a social democrat.
Okay.
He, he's he was certainly a Bernie guy. He was, he was an advocate of all of the sorts of reforms that he was running on, and probably more. I think that in the ideal Sam Seder world, probably tax rates and economic policies would be set up in such a way there wouldn't be any billionaires, etc. But I think to pluck a metaphor that he himself has used, right? If we're sort of you think of this as like a road trip, the exit I would want to get off on would be later than the exit he'd want to get off on, right? That I think that ultimately my perspective, which was the same as Sam's late co-host and my friend Michael Brooks, is that ultimately, social democracy is a good first step, but it is only a first step, and we should go even further than that in terms of like sort of fundamentally restructuring the economy. But I think I think that I'm with you. I think that one of the things that I like best about Sam is his debates with libertarians, and Larry Sharpe is somebody who has been on this show in the past. He was like, trying to remember exactly. I feel like it was a while ago. It was like probably 2021 sometime. If it was 2022, it was early 2022. But he came on, and I argued with him a bit there. I'm actually really interested, given my experience with him. So he's running, I believe now. As I don't know if they've actually, as the Libertarian nominee, or assume, yeah, it's September. They must have, anyway, for governor in New York, and previously he'd been an unsuccessful candidate for the Libertarian Party's vice presidential nomination. And so I feel like a lot of my conversation with Larry was sort of, I don't know, kind of like feeling out like where he was in the libertarian spectrum, and then as much as it was arguing with with where he was at, because I found him at least initially a little hard to pin down, because I think he's like probably a more pragmatic character than like some of the libertarians who, like, people remember that classic clip from 2016 of the Libertarian Convention where all the presidential candidates were reacting to the idea that driver's licenses were an acceptable use of government.
Yeah.
And like Gary Johnson said, yeah, and like everybody booed, you know, all the other ones were like, hell no, right? So I think he'd be more like Gary Johnson, less than those other guys as far as that goes. But there are obviously, you know, some basic libertarian premises there animating everything that I, you know, disagree with in a pretty basic way. And so all of that makes me very curious about where the conversation, you know, with Sam kind of goes. I did, like, you know, I am coming into this fresh, you know, I did click around a little bit earlier while I was trying to get a sense of it when we were prepared for this. And it does look like Sharpe gets, you know, I mean, gets fairly flustered at one point, you know, so it might have, you know, might be more exciting, you know, than the discussion that I had with him, as interesting as that was. But do you have any other thoughts before we get into it?
No, not really. I think that's a good way to set it up.
All right. Yeah. Well, I don't think Gary Johnson was a dumb guy, but I think he probably should have stopped getting high for the duration of running for president.
Yeah. I mean, he's a bit of a, from what I remember, he's kind of a bit of a more pragmatic libertarian too. Like,
no,
Johnson's,
Johnson's definitely more pragmatic libertarian than the people he was running against for the Libertarian nomination in 2016, and certainly more so than I think the people who've largely taken over the Libertarian Party, at least on a national level, since then. So, you know, I mean, in some ways, Johnson's, like, I mean, he was actually governor of New Mexico as a Republican. And, you know, I suspect that the differences between him and like a regular, you know, moderate Republican are that one, well, there are going to be some good differences that'll be like more socially liberal and, you know, I'm sure he's fine with, you know, gay people and weed and all of that. Right. You know, and probably has better foreign policy views too, even if he should have brushed up on some of that before he ran for president. But, you know, but probably.
Yeah. Like, was it Aleppo that he didn't know the name? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. But, you know, but probably his actual views on that are better. But conversely, probably his economic views are, you know, from my perspective, I would imagine at least as bad as a regular Republican, and you know, maybe much worse, right? You know, that depending on how far, you know, he doesn't want to. Okay, he's okay with licensing drivers, which is good, but that's a pretty low bar, right? I mean, I think.
Yeah.
I also want to know, like, okay, are you going to try to privatize Medicaid? You know, what do we, you know, where does how far does this go? Right. So, and I guess, again, Larry Sharpe, I would see as a sort of less personally goofy, but probably ideologically, as far as I can tell, pretty much in that same zone as Johnson.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah. All right, let's get started.
Want to welcome to the program. He is the Libertarian candidate for the governorship of New York State, Larry Sharpe. Larry, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. Yes, this is my second shot at this, by the way, Sam. Not my first, my second.
This is the second time you have run.
Ran in 2018, got 2% of the vote, about 100,000 votes, and was able to have party status for the Libertarian Party for the first time ever in 2018. And we actually had in 2019 107 victories across the state once we were able to be on the ballot. Across New York State, we had 107 libertarians locally, only locally, of course, obviously local victories. And then by 2020, the state removed our ballot access, changed the rules, and threw everybody off the ballot. So I'm at it again. They try to stop me, but I'm either stupid or stubborn on both. I'm not sure, but I'm not done.
Maybe we'll find out.
Maybe both.
Now, and we should also say that you are not just the Libertarian Party candidate, but the Forward Party. This is the party that's been set up by
Andrew Yang.
Andrew Yang, right?
Absolutely. Well, I want to be clear on this. I don't
Christy Todd
actually
Whitman.
have their line, right? I am endorsed by the Forward Party, but I'm running on the Libertarian Party line. I'm endorsed by the party, the Forward Party, because I think, look, the reality of it is Andrew Yang and I agree on certain things, which is third party is the answer. If we don't have a third party, we're in trouble. So we've got to have a third party. So on that, we agree upon.
I think he agrees with you on some of your ideology too, frankly, that it was always my issue with Andrew Yang. At one point, we had talked about, talked about him talking about eliminating a lot of our social safety net. But let's just first start with, and I want to talk about this because I think this is maybe our one point of agreement.
I bet we have a lot, Sam. A lot.
Maybe two.
Okay, so two. That's a lot. That's more than one. I'm doubled. Look at that. I've already doubled it.
Good point. But let's just talk about this. What has happened in terms of a ballot, I should say, ballot access?
Yeah.
For not just the Libertarian Party, this also is the case for the Working Families Party. And I think Andrew Cuomo's Cuomo for Women Party or whatever it was that he was trying to set up, which was a fake party. I mean, we should also say this, there has been a history in this state of basically fake parties set up to confuse people. 100%. Libertarian Party is a real party, which I would argue also confuses people, but also
to be fair, the Green Party too, right?
Yes, and the Green Party
as well. Hawkins, the only two real parties that are not parasite parties, as you talk about, are the Libertarian Party and the Green Party. Every other party that's out there is a parasite party.
I think the Working Families Party is, they are a fusion ballot. They also do run candidates on the ballot, on their own ballot in local elections as well. So
people are there, but they almost always, more than 60% of the time for sure.
In New York.
In New York. Sorry, I should be clear.
And we should say
right,
they are
outside
separate.
of New York State, the Working Families Party is different work. Right. I'm talking about specifically in New York State. In New York State, the Working Families Party almost always adjusts back to Democrat in New York State.
That's true. 60% of the time, like you say.
Yeah.
So what happened? What changed materially at that time in 2020? This was Cuomo's way, I think, in many respects, of punishing the Working Families Party in particular.
Well, if you remember in 2018, Cynthia Nixon ran as a Working Party's family candidate for the governorship.
Yeah.
The Democratic Party pushed her out completely. She went and got signatures and got in the ballot anyway so that she could get into the primary. She lost the primary. When she lost the primary, the Working Families Party actually wanted to still keep her because they were anti-Cuomo. They still wanted to keep her anyway. And he bullied the Working Families Party into just saying, you know what, just back me. And he did. Cynthia backed out. They backed Cuomo, but he didn't want that to happen ever again. So he wanted to get rid of all the parasite parties. So what happened was, it used to be you had to get 15,000 valid signatures across New York State to get on the ballot. While that is a lot, it's not undoable. It is a challenge, but it makes sure that only serious candidates get in. It wasn't undoable, and often people were able to do it. They then took that number and went from 15,000 to 45,000. They tripled it. And my argument was, that's now impossible. How can you do that? And only 6 weeks. And they moved the time from the summer to now towards the spring, where there's still snowstorms in New York State. And no fairs, right? Usually you go to fairs, get people to sign your petitions, but now there's no fairs going on, and there's still snowstorms and such, and 6 weeks. And just so that people understand how bad this is, if you're trying to do this, you have 50,000 signatures, because they actually go through and check every signature to make sure everything's accurate. So at least 50,000 signatures you have to get. It's not 6 weeks, because you lose 1 week prepping and prepping to set it up. You can give it to the Board of Elections in the format that they want, and then prepping to make sure your teams get out, what works, doesn't work. So you actually have 5 weeks. So that means 50,000 signatures, 10,000 a week. If you can get people to work 5 days a week, that's 2,000 signatures a day. A great signature gatherer will get 100 signatures a day. If they're amazing, the average only gets between 25 and 50 per day. So now that means I need like 40 or more people to work 5 days a week, 10 hours a day for 5 weeks straight. Impossible.
I think everybody can agree that that number is prohibitive for any party that isn't like, awash in cash.
No, I would argue, I go further than that, because here's the data that actually happened now. A multimillionaire, Harry Wilson, couldn't do it. A sitting congressman couldn't do it. So it's not prohibitive. It is impossible.
Okay.
They are literally awash in cash.
Okay.
And they couldn't do it.
Okay. So, I mean, but obviously the parties can do it because they have a party apparatus already set up. I mean,
parties don't have to do it. They are automatically on.
Oh, Democrats and Republicans
Correct.
are automatic. Ah, okay.
That's my point. Nobody can do it.
Okay. So
the parties that are established are on automatically.
Okay. And so you're going to court to try and fight this and show that it's and presumably we'd want to return it back to basically the way it was. 15,000 signatures. And okay. Well, I support going back to that number. If there's anybody out there who has an argument that 15,000 for whatever reason is too low and that it really should be 17,000 or 18,000, I mean, it should be doable.
Correct.
By a party that is at least, been able to access ballots, within the past with those resources and that. I mean, there's a way to
push them. Even if you say 45,000, because some people will argue, well, it's 18 million, 19 million people in New York State. Is 45,000 really that much? To be forward, we could do 45,000, just not in 6 weeks. If you want to do 45,000, you got to give us a couple of months.
Yep, fair enough.
And then we can do it. So you can either raise the amount of time or shorten the signatures. It's physically impossible, and that's the issue.
Fair enough. All right. So
all right, let's pause there. I know you wanted to weigh in on the third party stuff.
Yeah, I kind of want to ask you about the details of that and comment on a little bit on the similarities and differences between the way the electoral system works in the U.S. and here in Canada. I know there is kind of a similar thing with like how there are a whole lot of other smaller parties that take away votes from the major parties, because here in Canada it usually kind of ends up being a 3-party system. It's the Liberals, Conservatives, and NDP, which are kind of like a progressive party. Usually those are the 3 that have the highest chance of winning, but there's been kind of a contest to see who gets the new leadership of the Conservative Party. And in the last election, there were a whole bunch of parties that were really similar, that were super far right and were like against vaccines and all that kind of stuff, and they kind of took away a whole bunch of votes from the Conservative Party. So, but I know that, like, at least according to what I've heard before, you've said that you approve. If I remember correctly, you've said that you approve of something like a third party, because there's this kind of duopoly there, based especially with politicians being kind of like corrupted by their donors, just makes it not work very well.
Yeah, I mean, look, I guess I'd separate out a couple of different questions, one of which is like, what's the best sort of political strategy for the left in the US, like right this second? And then the other is like, what would I hope to happen long term? And then a third one is like, which I think is actually closer to what Sam and Larry were talking about here, is like, what should the election laws be, right? Should we have, is this the way elections should work? And the third one's actually the easiest for me, which is, I think it is really outrageous the way that the American electoral system is set up to make it extraordinarily difficult for like other parties besides the main two to compete, like at really almost every level, from the sort of petty stuff that Larry Sharpe is talking about here, which is, I mean, very real, to, up through like how debates are often organized, up through, the fact that, like, at least in Canada, you can have like a coalition government which there's like no mechanism like that, in the US, right? That, so for example, in the 2000 election, Al Gore and Ralph Nader, between them, got like, about 53% of the vote, I think, right? And so in a different country with a different electoral system, they could have just made some sort of like coalition deal, and and whatever. Al Gore would have still been the prime minister, but they would have had to give the Green Party some cabinet positions, and make a compromise platform, which would have been great, right? Instead, we had George W. Bush and everything that happened because of Bush, and the Democrats are at fault for that a lot, because they because I think they're probably most worried about the effects of competition, but like the Republicans too, because it's not like they want they want it to make things any easier for the libertarians. And there are lots of ways that you could change the system just a little bit that would make it way more reasonable as far as stuff like this goes. So one of them is you could do like what California does, and have like a jungle primary where in the first stage of the election, all of the candidates, it's like the third party candidates, Democrats, Republicans, whatever, are on the ballot, right? So including like if the 2016 election had been like a California style jungle primary in a national level, what that would have meant was there would have been a first stage where Hillary and Bernie were both on the ballot, and so was Trump, and a couple of I don't know, Ted Cruz, and also some Gary Johnson and Jill Stein and whoever, and then the top two vote getters would go on to the next one. Or even better, you could just do ranked choice voting like they do in Alaska. That's how Palin just lost, where you can just say like one Al Gore, two one Ralph Nader, two Al Gore, whatever, whoever you want to put before Bush. I guess if it were me, that would have actually been David McReynolds, who was the Socialist Party candidate in 2000, would have been one, and then Nader would have been two, and then Al Gore would have been three. But like that way, if there aren't enough people who vote for your number one, then then your number two choice goes in, and whatever, which is actually the way a lot of different things work, right? Like that's how the Academy of Motion Pictures does Oscar voting. I
didn't know that.
Yeah, right. And again, Alaska recently implemented that, for state elections, and which actually turned out to be great. Again, that's how Sarah Palin lost, because not enough of the people who voted for the other Republican, were the combined votes of her and the other Republican were over 50%, but it turned out that a lot of people whose first choice was the other Republican would have still taken the Democrat over her, and so that's why the Democrat won, because they had ranked choice voting. And you could do a lot of other reforms that go further than those two, but I mean, like either of those two or anything like them would be better than what we have right now. And obviously, yeah, I mean, I think that I think in a democracy should make it as easy as possible for people to vote for whoever they want to vote for. And it's really bad, right, that the Democratic establishment often, tries to, do what they can to like come up with spurious excuses to like keep the Green Party off the ballot and et cetera. That's all very bad. Mm-hmm. Now, I think that's all a kind of separate question from the first two, which like, what's the best strategy for the left right now? Well, I think that the kind of percentage that Larry Sharpe got as the Libertarian candidate in that governor's election in New York, 2%, is pretty typical of what like really successful third party candidates are going to get in the system that we have right now. Cause like the way it's set up just really discourages voting for them, because, that most likely the person you're voting for is not going to win. And then, your voters are rationally worried about handing the election to the person they would actually like the least. Right. So, so I don't think that like trying to start third party, like with their own ballot line right now, in most cases, maybe in some local circumstances that makes sense. But like for the most part, I don't think that makes sense strategically right now. But yeah, I would like to reform the electoral system to make it easier for third parties to run. And I'd also, long term, who knows? I mean, we got the Republican, like when the Republican Party started in the late 19th century, that was, it was like an anti-slavery third party, right? I mean, that was basically because one of the existing parties, the Whigs, fell apart, and like the anti-slavery wing of the Whigs became the Republicans. And like, is it possible that we could imagine some similar scenario where like the Bernie kind of wing of the Democrats, like that there was like somehow organically emerged as a new major party? Yeah, maybe, right? I mean, like, I don't think you can force it, right? I think that's a kind of historical process that if it happens, it happens. But like, I also think, yeah, I mean, definitely, I think we should have a different electoral system. So like people didn't have to agonize about like, okay, do I vote for this guy? Because if I do, then like, if I do, then this other guy who would be like my last possible choice might win. I think it's crazy that we make people make those choices.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Yeah, I think in Canada, it seems like it's way easier for other parties to get on the ballots, because almost every time I vote, there are several different parties that are options. But usually the parties other than the three main parties, the Conservatives, the Liberals, and the NDP, they usually also still have a very small chance of winning, even though they can get on the ballot. So yeah, that's interesting.
Canada still has first past the post, right? So like, so you can, in other words, like, there's still the concern that like, so even though it's easier for parties to get on the ballot, and even though the stakes aren't quite as high because you can have coalition governments, it's still like for any given like seat in parliament, it's still, you could still have these crazy situations where, I don't know, the Liberal gets 30%, 31% of the vote, and the NDP gets 29, and the Conservative gets 40, so they win, even though 60% of people in that area tried to vote to somebody to their left, right? So
Right.
Even though it's better than the U.S. system, but it's still not great for third parties, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I often end up voting for third parties, and they hardly ever win.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, let's keep going.
Let's move on to with that said, we're in agreement there, and
we're
hopefully
looking good. Look at
hopefully the state is that the state Supreme Court? Is that where
that's where we are? Yeah, we actually went there last Monday, not this week, the week before, and we're actually waiting on an actual ruling right now. And this long, I mean, we're waiting 7, 8, 9 days now. Is generally good for us. Usually the state tells us no, and the state's been very forward.
Let's get into the substantive part of not the process part, but the substantive part. You're running for governor. You're the Libertarian candidate.
Yep.
Presumably you've gone through like a nomination process with the Libertarian Party. Is
Twice.
that right?
Yes.
Okay. Why are you a libertarian? I'm like, because I've interviewed and sort of debated many libertarians. I've never had a libertarian on the program who didn't disparage the other libertarians as not being legitimate libertarians. But I assume you have a broader tent, at least in terms of like, but
No
what
doubt.
is it about libertarianism? If you explain what libertarianism
Sure,
is.
I'm happy to tell you why I'm the broad tent libertarian. It is rare in general libertarians to actively hate me. Some do, but it's rare. Most either like me or think, yeah, he's fine. Because I think one of the most open tent libertarians there are, because in my view, what libertarian is you can be as liberal or as conservative as you want to be. Just don't force your views on others. Go out of your way to allow others to do what they want to do. Leave them alone. The more you do that, the better. So if we move policies towards that, I'm pretty happy. If we start going towards that area, I'm pretty happy.
Pro-abortion rights.
People should do to be forward. I am personally anti-abortion. So what I have promised to do in New York State is that there will be less abortions in New York State. But why? Not by using government of force, by creating better environments so that women make better choices. In my view, what I feel are better choices. So I'm going to try to get women to make better choices. How do I do that? By making sure that New York State, it is very easy relative to other states for surrogacy. For many years, surrogacy was illegal in New York State. Now, recently, they've changed that law, and they should make it easy to be a surrogate if you want to. Easier adoption laws. And you should be able to have, without question, contraception over the counter. You do those types of things, women will make better decisions, in my view, and there will be less abortions. So I don't want people to have abortions, and I don't want the government to tell women what to do with their body.
Okay. So, and would you also make it easier to have children? I mean, one of the big reasons why people choose not to carry a pregnancy to term or not have children at certain times is because it's hard to raise kids in our society. So would you do things like expand universal pre-K? Would you do universal daycare?
Sure. Let me touch two of those pieces. I'll touch daycare and schooling, both of them. When it comes to daycare, there's a side piece I want to use that helps community, and then a bigger piece, which is schooling. I'll touch the side piece, which is a small chunk. It's a small chunk. What I want to do is I want to allow what's called child gardens. Child care right now is very expensive in New York State. So it's a problem. I know, I get it. So you want to allow for child gardens. What a child garden is, it allows an individual to go to a nonprofit if they want to, and leave their child there if that nonprofit has an agreement with the state, which is fine, just an agreement, meaning that they are not licensed to be a child care facility. But for example, this would assist things like local churches in getting back into the child care arena, VFWs who have elderly people who want to watch children, giving communities opportunities to drop their kids off if they want to. It's voluntary if they choose to. Right now, the parent would get in trouble for doing that. So I want to allow the parent to do that if the parent wants to.
Why would the parent get in trouble right now for doing that?
Generally speaking, if parents begin to drop their kids off in places, the community is going to call the cops and say, look, she's being a bad parent. He's being a bad parent. It's happened in the past. And then child services comes by, starts investigating. That kind of thing happens, particularly if the parent, hold on one second, particularly if the parent has gone through family court. If the parent's gone through family court, the family court system often gets involved, and now parents become afraid to drop their kids off.
I'm confused. Like, you mean just leaving your kid at the church, or
correct? Yes, that's what I'm telling you. Yes,
but who's going to take care of them at the church?
It would, if you chose to do that, it would be people who run the church, like church elders, church employees, or volunteers for that local church.
So would there be? So the church would set up a daycare, and then they could drop off the kid. Okay.
Correct. Yes.
But couldn't churches set up daycares now?
Generally speaking, they can't because of what's been happening in the local churches, particularly black churches, as an example. Many of them have been having financial issues, and they can't handle the regulatory process required to be an official daycare. So I'm saying, don't make that illegal. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, so you're saying you don't want
you don't want to go to daycare, go ahead, but make it legal for someone.
Let me understand what you're saying here. Let me understand what you're saying. So, in other words, you want to get rid of the licensing requirements for daycare.
No, it's not what I said at all.
I don't understand. You're saying I don't understand. I guess I just don't understand what you're saying.
No worries. I'm saying if you're a nonprofit and someone wants to drop their kid off at your nonprofit, that you're not going to have any problem from the family courts or from CPS. That's what I'm saying.
But
it does happen now. If you think I'm making that up, you can just do some homework.
No, I guess, like, I mean, we're talking about million plus children. Maybe at any given time, I don't know. Maybe it's not millions.
There's no way we're talking about 1 million children being dropped off at a church.
No. I understand that, but I'm asking. My question was, you want to reduce abortions by making it an easier choice for women and couples and people who can get pregnant to have kids. And I asked, what about universal pre-K or daycare?
And I said I was going to go there. I said I had one small thing, which was this, plus a large thing. This isn't I can't do one magic thing and fix it. There's at least 4, 5, 6 things.
You could.
No.
We did universal pre-K in the city, and we did that with taxation.
Correct.
We could do universal daycare.
Okay, we did it in the city, and it didn't magically make things great. It was one thing. Things aren't magically great in New York City right now because they did that thing.
Things aren't magically great in New York City.
Correct.
But if you want to call it magic or not, it's not really magic. It's all of a sudden, it became much easier to get your kid to go to pre-K. I mean,
yes, so let me go to my next step, which is changing our system from the current K through 12, which across New York State, which is K through 12, and moving it to a pre-K through 10. I think we should pay for pre-K all the way through 10th grade. Absolutely, I think we should. It should be a pre-K through 10 versus a current K through 12. We shouldn't have to, as we did in New York City, to your point, we had to make special laws to create pre-K. I think it should be statewide. Why not? So let's create a pre-K through 10 statewide plan. I think it works perfectly. But how we do that?
But wait a second. We lop off 2 years of high school education by doing
as a requirement. As a requirement. I'll keep going. If you let me go, I'll keep going.
I will.
The pre-K through 10 should be a requirement. That makes any sense. That's a requirement. The last 2 years of high school should be done in a separate way. Let me cover the pre-K through 10, then I'll cover the 2 years of high school at the end. Right now, we go K through 12. I'd rather us go pre-K through 10, and I'd rather us pay from a separate fund rather paying through local taxes. I think a separate fund is a better way of funding our school system. And you do it literally per student that is in that district. They get a flat fee. Right now, the state pays about $29,000, give or take, per kid in New York State per year. And we usually rank in the bottom 25 of the states, generally speaking, sometimes around 26, 27, sometimes low as 33, 34, depending upon what you're looking at. But we tend to rank low on education, spending the most in the entire nation. So I'd rather lower that number and go from a specific fund, a fund which is a New York State trust, similar to what they do in Norway, what they do in Singapore, that kind of thing. Funded heavily by private capital. Private capital right now is spending a lot of time trying to find places to put their money. Sadly for us, they're doing a lot of it in real estate. And as they start buying all the real estate, they're raising real estate property and making families unable to purchase housing. They're turning us into renters when some people don't want to be renters. I'd rather pull them out of the real estate market and put them instead into that trust. It'll be a trust that they will put into, and it's not debt. They get a dividend every year based upon how much money we create, backed by the tax base of New York State, which is about $80 billion or so in that area. So that fund now funds schools. If that funds schools, then there is no need for school tax. If we can end school tax, that will lower property tax by about 50% across the state as a general rule, depending on where you live. And it will also stabilize rents, allowing people to move out, allowing kids to have homes earlier, not requiring so many people having roommates, all those things. Make it easier for a young family to move into a home.
Larry, let me just see if I can understand this, because you're I mean, and
it's a detailed plan. It's a real plan.
I agree. It sounds very detailed.
It is.
The top line, of course, is losing 2 years of high school education, but we'll put that aside, I guess, for a moment.
I'm going to go there.
I know. But this trust that you're talking about, it's basically a security, right? I mean, we're creating some type of investment fund. Is that what it is?
Similar, yes.
And does it guarantee certain dividends to the people who invest in it?
Yes. It will be a small, very safe, low return, but safe return dividend for private capital and permanent capital.
So it's basically, it's a bond. It's a bond, right? I mean,
similar, but it's not debt. It's dividend based. You buy in and you get a chunk based upon it. It's almost like buying equity, almost like that.
And what happens if we have a stock market crash? What if the stock happen? Okay. So what happens to the funding?
With our pension plan now. We have a pension plan in New York State right now. Happens in New York State. And then the taxpayer puts a bunch of money in and we pay for it. And we wind up having what was now 17% of our budget is now to prep the pension or some number like that. Last I checked,
yeah. No, I definitely think that, exactly.
Yep.
But how would you replenish that fund and meet the obligation to the investors in the event that we can't we can't provide them the dividend, which I would imagine we have a legal responsibility to under your plan. But and how would you
like your questions, Sam? I do, and they're important questions, and I'm answering them. Every time you ask me a question, I give you an answer. And before we go any further, make sure we're clear on this. If you would ask the other gubernatorial candidates these questions, they would have nothing.
Okay, well, because
which is why it's so important that I am in this debate, so that they will have to have an actual answer. They don't.
Well, they're not suggesting privatizing the funding mechanism for public schools.
Correct. They have no answer.
Well, no.
What's Kathy Hochul's answer?
We have a system for funding schools now. I personally would like to
make
federalize
better schools, to make the schools better. What's her answer?
Changing the funding mechanism is not clear to me that it's going to make schools better.
Yes, and then let me explain why. I'll tell you why. First off, once we start funding schools that way, I've just said it's going to begin immediately to stabilize rents and lower property taxes. When that begins to happen, now more people will stay in New York State. Number one, more will stay. How many more? I don't know. But we've been losing population compared to the other states like there's no tomorrow. That's why we've already lost a congressperson. Compared to other states, we actually losing the most. And we are growing the slowest of all the other states out there.
I agree. And I do think housing is too expensive. What is the relationship? Yes. What is the relationship between less property taxes and lower rents?
Because once property taxes lower, people, I didn't say rents will get lower. I'm sorry, did I say that? I meant stabilize. Rents will stabilize and property taxes will be lower. Right.
Okay. So landlords will get more profit.
I didn't mean that if I said that. I said stabilize.
No. So landlords will gain more profit, and rents, according to you, will not go up because
property taxes won't be so high. So they'll be able to get more profit without raising rents.
Won't they also be able to get more profit
without having to raise the rent?
Having been a renter in New York City for, I don't know, over the course of 20 some odd years or whatever it was.
I've been both a renter and an owner, both.
Same. My sense is that it's not a function of changes in property taxes that drives rents. It is what the landlord thinks they can get.
Yes, agreed.
Because we've had an explosion of rent increase in this state, and it has been completely untethered from a change in property tax. So
most of that, you're right. And most of that has been because permanent capital is purchasing so many of the property relatively to what it used to be in the past, because there's no other place for them to invest. So when permanent capital starts buying up property for rentals, they just keep raising the money because that's all they do. But when individual people rent, right? When individual people rent their homes out, as they do often, they don't push as much. That's just the truth, right? People have been renting their homes out for decades, for, I don't know, centuries probably, I guess.
So Larry, you're saying...
All right, I kept trying to wait for a natural place to stop, but I don't think I'm going to get to one. So I think we should just stop, especially because I know you want to talk about abortion, and that was a while ago, and this is all theoretically related, but I'm not quite sure they're ever going to get back there.
Okay, yeah, I mean, so in terms of abortion, I think that's interesting in terms of libertarians, because some of them are pro-choice and some of them are pro-life, and I personally am pro-choice, which I see as a small L libertarian position, because it's about the freedom of a woman to do what she does with her own body, and without the government having the right to dictate what happens there. And also in terms of this education piece, I really don't understand much of the details of what they're talking about, so you probably understand a lot more about that than me. But one thing that confuses me with libertarians is that, and it seems this way with Larry Sharpe here, that it seems like his goal behind supposedly fixing the education system is actually to lower taxes. And the thing that bothers me about libertarians is that it seems like they see it as an inherently good thing to lower taxes all the time. And it seems like that's just basically an a priori faith claim on their part for the most part. Even if you read people who, like anarcho-capitalists like Dave Smith mentioned, like von Mises and those people like that, if you read their books, they don't really make empirical arguments for why lowering taxes is inherently good. They basically just make like philosophical a priori claims about it.
Yeah. So starting with the abortion part, I think that, yeah, I mean, most libertarians, I think, are pro-choice. It's very hard for me to understand how somebody could call themselves libertarian and not be, but I also know that there are a bunch of libertarians who aren't, right? So your Reason magazine kind of libertarians were all pro-choice, right? Your sort of Gary Johnson kind of libertarians are all pro-choice. I feel like back in like 2012, 2016, I was seeing a lot of the like that Libertarian Party bumper sticker that was like, I'm pro-choice on everything, right? So they would even like use that to like explain the rest of their politics. But like Dave Smith, who you mentioned, I'm pretty sure is not.
He's talked a lot about how he's pro-life now. He's become pro-life since he had a kid.
Yeah, right. And I mean, I think that like the way that the first thing Sharpe said about that is fine, right? I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I don't partially agree with that. I mean, like, I think that I mean, my view is that there's no like a first trimester fetus that doesn't have anything approaching a functioning brain that could support consciousness. I don't think that has any moral status at all. And so I don't really care how many or how few abortions there are. And even later in the pregnancy, when that starts to change, I think that I would still prioritize, a pregnant woman's right to bodily autonomy, right, to control what happens in her own body.
And and you see, like, you've seen a few examples after Roe versus Wade being overturned in the U.S. about like that one that I've heard people talk about, where a woman had a fetus that had no skull, but she still had to carry it to term because it was illegal for her to get that aborted.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think you've actually seen this like really grisly real life experiment play out in a lot of these states where you see what this stuff looks like in practice, right? Like if you say, well, I have, like, oh, well, that's fine as long as you allow it in cases of, risk to the life of the mother. It's like, yeah, but then when people are worried they're going to get arrested if they make the wrong call, how close to death's door do you want somebody to have to be, before you let them make what they're their doctor to think is the right medical choice. So yeah, I think it's like much better to have a pretty hands-off legal approach to that and say. And yeah, I mean, I think right to bodily autonomy is incredibly important, which ironically, I think some right wingers can have discovered that in the context of thinking about vaccines, even though like getting a shot is a much more trivial violation of the right to bodily autonomy.
Yeah, that's why I agree with people who say on either side of the political spectrum that it's like it's more consistent to be pro-choice, but also to be against vaccine mandates and vice versa. But that being said, I think that being politically consistent is sometimes overrated. But I mean, I personally fall into that category, like being pro-choice and against vaccine mandates. But I mean, because I look at both issues similarly, although they are very different issues in some ways, like you said.
Well, what I would say, yeah, we actually hosted on the show a debate between Richard Wolff and Branko Markotic about that.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
And I would just, without getting off into a thing about vaccine mandates, the one thing I would just say is that like, making somebody get a shot is a violation of their bodily autonomy. It's a much smaller violation than making somebody carry a fetus against their will for months. And even there, right, I think that when we talk about making, there's a pretty broad spectrum, right? I mean, like if anybody's talking about like holding people down, like get the cops to like hold them down.
Yeah.
Sticks in the needle, then I certainly disagree with that person. I don't actually see that position being advocated a lot, right? I see sort of different degrees of pressure, and then I think there's a more complicated issue, but yeah, right. Okay. So fair enough. Now, having said all that, I'm not particularly bothered by like the sort of Liz Brunig sort of position on abortion, which is what it sounded like Larry started giving like a more libertarian version of. So Liz Brunig, if you're not familiar with her, is she's like a columnist and writer who's been with a bunch of different publications. She's Matt Bruning's wife. You might be familiar with him, even if you aren't with her. And
has he been on here before?
What's that? No, Matt is actually going to be a guest in a few weeks. Liz has never been on the show, but but in any case, right? Like Liz Brunig is like she's like, I think her views about economics are pretty much like mine, but she's also like a, pretty, like not crazily, but like pretty religious Catholic. And so she'll say, if you ask her about it, that she, she personally believes that abortion is morally wrong. But my understanding is not, she doesn't go around like advocating the government make laws against it. In fact, I think she thinks that that's the kind of thing like drugs where it'd just be counterproductive. She just thinks that like, well, you should just give like parents more financial support so that they, so that like more people will choose to have kids. And even though that's not my position, again, I laid out what my position was earlier. Like, I'm not tremendously bothered by that, right? I mean, I think that like some, in a pluralist society, different people are going to have religious and moral views that, that are going to like be more negative about abortion than mine. But like, I think the really important thing is that you don't want to like, or certainly don't advocate for legally banning it. Right. So, so that sounded like kind of what Larry was going to give some sort of libertarian version of earlier. Like he sort of started out explaining it in this way that's like, okay, is this going to be some sort of weird libertarian attempt at doing the Liz Brunig balance that like, say, okay, I don't personally morally like abortion, but I don't want laws against it. I just want, I just want there to be, somehow or another, something to make it easier for people to have kids. So he started sounding like that's what he was going to say. And he went off this really weird direction with the school, like the school funding privatization thing. And I agree with you that like, that's what it sounds like, is this sort of like a priori libertarian, like kind of, hatred of higher taxes. But but I guess this is kind of giving me flashbacks to my conversation with Larry, which is to say that like, the thing that I found a little frustrating about him is that like this right here is where he wants to have the conversation and the sort of like weeds of like his particular like policy ideas, and which is often not really productive when you're talking to somebody who just disagrees with you about fundamental things. And so it's like, okay, that's nice, right? That you have this like really well worked out idea of like how it would work if we got rid of like local school taxes. But like, what I really want to talk about is why are you against local school taxes, right? Like, what's the, what's your more sort of fundamental philosophical approach? Because there clearly is one that's lurking in the background. I think you nailed that. I think that's absolutely right. I mean, that clearly he's got some kind of like just in principle objection, not to all taxes, I mean, he's like pragmatic enough. I'm sure he's not going to say like abolish all taxes, but some kind of pragmatic hostility to taxes where like lowering tax rates is like an end in itself. And that's kind of where, okay, I mean, I think that what he's describing is kind of convoluted and strange, and somehow it involves like lopping off the last 2 years of high school from the main funding mechanism. And I still want to hear about that part,
they get into that a little more, I think.
Okay. So yeah, so we'll hear about that, but it's like, it's also just like, okay, but like what I really want to hear about is like, look, you don't want this because you think that, you know, not having local school taxes, because that'll lower property taxes, which will in turn lower rent, which will in turn make it easier for people to have housing, which will in turn make them more likely to have, you know, this whole Rube Goldberg explanation you're laying out. I don't really think that that's why you want to do that. I think, you want to do this because you're a libertarian and you don't like taxes. And I'd much rather argue about that, right, than like go through the 20 stages of like, okay, but if we get rid of the school taxes, that'll do this, which will then do that, which will then do
Yeah.
that, right? Because it's like, and similarly with the whole thing with, you know, the side piece with daycare, right? Like, I'm still not sure I understand exactly how his proposal works there, because it sure sounded like he was saying, let's like get rid of licensing requirements for daycares. But then like when Sam said that, he said, no, I'm not saying that. Right. But it's like somehow or another, he wants to do something or other that would like make it easier on a regulatory level for like different places to like operate as daycares. But like, I don't know what that actually means in terms of what the rules are right now versus what they would look like if he had his way. And again, I kind of feel like he's not talking about the main issue, because I think the real main issue is like, okay, but if you really want to make it easier for people to have kids, here's what which, I don't want that because I think it'll lower abortion. I just want it as an end in itself. Like I think people should be able to, make whatever life choices they want to make, right? If they want to have families, we should make it easier for them to do it. But like, if you want to make it easier to have people to have kids, then like, why not just do like state funded daycare? And again, I think the real answer to that question would be because I would be against raising taxes to do it. But like, if so, why don't we just talk about that, right? Instead of talking about like, oh, but if you changed, such and such, state regulations, it was going to be a little easier for the VFW hall to like also, double as a daycare center. Like, just like, that's a discussion to have once we've all decided that just raising taxes to pay for daycare is like unacceptable. But like,
yeah,
I want to focus on that part, right? Not the like, okay, what are the exact policy details of this libertarian workaround that you think is like going to help with the problem a little bit in a way that's consistent with libertarian principles. I want to actually argue about the libertarian principles.
Yeah. And I'm like you were saying there, how he goes down this rabbit hole of lowering taxes is good because it'll lead to this, which will lead to this, which will lead to this. I don't think he's done an adequate job of explaining how lowering taxes will increase education or increase daycare, or improve or lower daycare costs either.
No, I don't. I think all of that is like, yeah, because it's like the same, it's like all the same stuff. Because it's like, okay, like maybe if somehow or another it was easier for the, VFW hall to clear the regulatory requirements to doubles a daycare, then like a few kids would be able to like, stay there or whatever. But it's like, it's a little half-baked, but also like, why do we have to do that? Right? Why can't we just like have like public sector daycare, right? Like what's your real objection to that? I want to talk about that. And then similarly with the rent thing, it's like, okay, in a weird way, Sam kind of said this in passing and I would agree with what he said. Like, I think like local property taxes are a terrible way to fund education. I think it'd be way better to just have like a, uniform federal system. So so funding for school districts didn't depend on like the income of people in that particular school district. Right. So I think that makes tons of sense, but like this weird scheme to like, that somehow we're going to make it private bonds, and that's also going to Rube Goldberg with the rent issue, because like private capital is going to be attracted to buying like the school bonds or the things that aren't quite bonds, but they're like school bonds. And that means that it won't go to real estate. So it'll be mom and pop landlords. And, that'll be like, it's like, I don't know, maybe some of these things would have the ripple effects that you think they would, but like but one, I don't really think he's making his case very well. But two, more importantly, like, why should we have to do it that way, right? Why should we just why not just have state daycare, right? Why not just as an option, right? Why not just have why not just build more public housing, or just have direct rent control, or this or that or the other thing, right? Like, and
one thing you've mentioned in terms of that too before is raising the minimum wage, which would help people to be more easily able to take care of families and like make it easier for them to afford daycare, probably.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, this is absolutely, raise the minimum wage and also and also make it much easier to organize labor unions, which would do the same thing. So I think again, I just feel like the thing that I found a little bit frustrating about arguing with Larry, and the thing that I'm a little frustrated by watching Larry argue with Sam, is like, look, if we already agreed with you about this more basic thing, that's like, no, it's bad to just like directly do things through government with like taxation and minimum wage laws and all that stuff, then sure, all of the stuff that he's proposing is like, oh, here's my libertarian solution for how to work around that. I don't know, maybe, right? But it's like, I don't even know what the point is of talking about that until we've like hashed out the much more like fundamental thing that for whatever, maybe it's better than the debate. But right now, for whatever reason, it doesn't really seem like he wants to talk about.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, let's keep going.
You see the big explosion when you add permanent capital into the mix. I'm saying let's pull permanent capital out of the mix.
Well, it's not going to necessarily. You're trying to entice them with a different investment vehicle that has fixed returns that are low, and you're suspecting. You think that people are going to get out of the real estate business because of that.
I'm saying some of private capital will, yes, because that is riskier than something backed by a government. Yes,
usually when people would go into that, I mean, they could go buy bonds if they didn't want. They could buy municipal bonds right now they didn't want things as
they still are. Yes,
but Larry, my point is this: is that you're saying if we do this. Mm-hmm. Then necessarily that will happen. And you've done it twice now. One is if we have a safe investment vehicle that provides low, but guaranteed returns, which is really like a U.S. Treasury bond or a municipal bond or a state bond.
Similar.
But because that exists, all of a sudden people are going to invest less in real estate. There's no evidence that that's the case. You're also asserting, let me finish. You're also asserting that if we reduce property taxes, landlords are not going to chase profits whenever they can, which I also,
I don't know what you're talking about.
You said it's going to stabilize rents.
Correct.
Yes, and there's no evidence. There's no, excuse me. There's no evidence. There's no evidence that a landlord is inhibited for seeking more profits, even if they get more profits.
Sure. Agreed.
Like if a landlord thought like, I could raise the rent here by $50.
Yes.
And I get that profit. I have no need to raise it to $100 because I'm already getting $50. That is not my experience of how American capitalism works.
No, I agree with you. And landlords will always do it, but something else will also happen. There'll be a landlord who now can lower their rent by $50 and still make money because they haven't gotten anybody into their basement apartment or into their secondary apartment. So some landlords, in an attempt to get any money, will lower their rents. And if some lower their rents, even if only 10% lower their rents, if only 5% lower their rents. By default, some people will go there. That will affect the rest of the market. That's kind of how it works.
Yeah, except for no one's feeling the pressure to lower rents. And the reason why rents are so sky high is because there's not enough housing. I mean, the obvious answer to what you're talking about.
Yep.
If the issue, and we were talking about schools, but if the issue is how do we lower rents in New York, it seems to me we build more, we zone.
Yes.
And by we, I mean our government oversees this. And we have some form of rent regulation.
Rent regulation. Wow. Okay. No, you had me until the rent regulation piece. You had me until then. I was good until that. Then you had me. No, rent regulation has made lots of problems which I don't want to get involved in. Build more housing. I'm in. Change zone. Look,
you're okay for government. You're okay for more government housing.
We are basically, me and you, we're agreeing on all kinds of things.
You're good with government housing.
I have no problem with us building more housing. Government housing has to have a specific piece to it, though. A specific piece. Government housing has to become rent to own. If you want to own, you should be able to rent to own. If we change that, now we're rocking and rolling. I don't want the standard government housing. If you've seen it in New York State, it's terrible. I don't want that.
It's incredibly underfunded too. But
say again?
It's incredibly underfunded. I mean, we need the federal government to get more.
That's the answer that they always say. We have a $220 billion budget. More than only 20 countries have a larger budget than us. Underfunding is a garbage. That's not true. Because how much can we possibly have? 300 billion? 400 billion? No, the system is broken. And what I'm saying is, I'm happy with government housing if we do rent to own. Rent to own changes everything, and not the rent to own we have with some of the private capital people who are just stealing people's money. I mean, an actual rent to own system to where now someone who is stuck in their world in government housing can actually own their own home if they choose to. Not requirement, but option. You begin to do that, well, now we're not as concerned about gentrification. Now we have more of an ownership mindset. Now we have people who want to invest in their properties. Rent to own, I'm in. But the way we're doing it now, we'll just give it more money. We've been saying just give it more money for 50 years or 70 years. And no, it's not working.
We've been giving less. But put that aside. Put that aside. We've been getting less money to government housing, as opposed to, and that's why I think people are saying more. But you're suggesting this rent to own thing is a state or a federal program?
The state's fine. Look, I'm running for governor. I'm running for governor. I'm happy to make it statewide. I mean, I can't really affect the federal as much, but whatever I could affect, for example, NYCHA, I could affect that. So I would want to begin to make that, to the best of my ability, shift that towards rent to own.
Okay,
and
so
then
let's
if we
talk
go
about
even further. The goal would be in my long-term goal. My long-term goal to get people to build more housing would be if we can create a system to where now those same private capital people who are throwing money into buying places and renting them, that I could get them even to build the equivalent of government housing. So they could build cheaper housing, the equivalent of government housing, with another similar rent-to-own process within that. So I can get more and more people moving into a rent-to-own concept. More people who, the sad part is, I don't know where you grew up, but I grew up in a very poor neighborhood, poor area. Most people didn't even imagine they would ever own a house. And I think we're there now for many Americans. They believe, I'm never going to own a house. So I want to change the environment. And I want people to believe, no, I can own a house. If I want to, I can do that. The more we push rent to own, the better we're going to be. And the problem is the people right now who are doing most building are large hedge funds, huge real estate companies with billions of dollars who are doing this. So how do I entice them to do what I think is the right thing, which is building houses and homes and apartments for people who aren't going to be able to afford one? Well, I give them incentive. I have them do it. I let them sponsor if they want to. Name the housing after your hedge fund if you want to, whatever's going to make you feel good. And on top of it, in New York State right now, when they sell that home that they have a capital gains tax. I would say if you instead do rent to own the way I'm telling you to do so, there'd be no capital gains tax on whatever you sell. And that would make some of the people who are already dropping literally billions of dollars in building homes to shift into building homes for rent to own, getting people who are.
How are those people who are eligible for government housing going to afford that if it is a hedge fund anticipates making those kind of profits and they just want to save on their capital gains?
Yes, because right now, if you're dropping $10 billion in homes, capital gains tax is going to be a lot of money for you. If I'm eliminating the capital gains tax, they'll make money on the back end versus losing that.
You still have the same system of like assuming that they're going to go like, you know what, guys? Hey, let's be cool. We're getting our capital gains here.
I'm not assuming any of that. Here's what I would ask. Hold on. You're saying that my assumptions are so wrong and so bad. Okay. That's a plan. What I'm talking about could actually happen. Like they would actually think about it. How do I know that? I work in the financial world and people say, yeah, that's Larry, that's not bad. I would consider that.
Okay. So Larry,
instead, I would
consider that. But
the Republican answer right now, the Republican answer is simply this. There's no problem.
How much did property taxes?
Let's put more money.
Let me just ask you this. Okay. I mean, hypothetically, I'm sure you've talked to friends of yours who said, yeah, I'd look into it. How much did prices drop across the board after the Trump tax cuts?
I don't know.
The answer is 0. That's how much they dropped. And based upon your theory, if we cut taxes, prices drop. And
I said. That's not what I said. What I just said.
I asked you, wait a second. Okay.
Hold on. Are we talking about the capital gains tax?
Yeah.
Okay. No. That's not what I said. What I said was, if they get a benefit for doing the thing, which is creating more rent to own housing, then we'll have more rent to own housing.
Yes.
That's what I said.
Yes,
I didn't say prices magically come down.
I
said we'll have more rent to own housing.
I understand. And I said, how are the people who we're talking about who can't afford the rents now going to afford that? And you said, well, they'll make it more affordable because they're getting the capital gains tax cut. And so you have set up this.
I don't think I said that.
Well, how did we make it? I asked you the question 5 minutes ago. How are people going to afford this? And you gave me that answer.
They're already paying for government housing now. I'm not changing their rents. I'm just saying it needs to start going from rent to own. I'm not raising their rents. They're paying their rent now.
Okay, so you're going to build these houses and they're going to be at the same rent that they exist now.
That's what I'm trying to encourage. Yes, that's the rule. If you do that, that's when you get the tax cut.
So these private entities
that I'm telling you to do,
these private entities
get the tax cut.
You're going to put rent control on these private entities. They're not going to be able to charge higher rents.
If they want my tax cut, yes. If they want my tax, or they can do what they're doing now. I'm not forcing them to do the thing, but they can do the thing if they want to get the tax cut, which I believe will help out people really. I believe, and
so you're basically just saying we're going to instead of the government essentially contracting to build these things,
correct.
We're going to privatize these things, and we're going to still pay with government money by giving them tax breaks on it. So the government's still going to pay for it. It's just going to be in the hands of private enterprise who are going to manage these things because private enterprise loves to manage essentially rent-controlled buildings. Is that what you're suggesting? I mean, if that's the case.
What we have now is we have NYCHA failing miserably. So we have now. We have public housing failing miserably. So we have now. So what I'm saying is I have an optional plan. If my plan's a complete failure, if you're right and my plan's a failure, then no one will take it and we have no change. Okay, then you're right and I was wrong. It's possible. But if I'm right, then this works very well. If no one listens to my plan, we keep walking down this horrible road we've been walking down for the past 40 years.
Well, there are other plans.
I know you're trying to match my plan against perfection. I'm not. I'm matching my plan against status quo.
Okay,
which is what we have right now.
I understand. I think there's definitely other plans on how to improve housing. But let's get back to school. You want to stop?
You didn't like my housing thing?
Well, I think privatizing and expecting private entities to accept what you're talking about and not. I just don't trust private entities at this point.
Do you trust government more?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do.
That one we can't agree upon.
Right. I mean, well, that's fundamental, right?
Yep.
I mean, you
That
don't
one we
trust
can't agree
government, but you know, I just think the redistribution
so
of
good,
money
too.
to private
Doing so good.
entities not helpful. But 10, so we stop schools at 10th
So
grade.
you think
Let's
monopoly is good? All right.
I think do I think that government monopoly is good?
I know you do.
I do to a certain extent, but I don't think that it's a monopoly that the government is. I'm not proposing government have a monopoly on housing. I think there can be private housing. I think that can exist.
You've just told me that you don't think private companies do a good job at managing housing.
I don't think private entities would do a good job at housing non-market rate housing. Yes.
All I would say is look at the nonprofits that run housing and then look at the government housing. And I think you'll find nonprofit, which is private, far better than government housing.
Do they do it at the same scale?
No, not at all.
Right.
So then how about we have a whole bunch of small ones and it will be better. Look at like Jericho Project in the Bronx, an example. Their housing is way better. I mean,
I know this is the same argument with charter schools too, Larry, but the fact of the matter is that charter schools as a whole do not outperform public schools as a whole. You certainly can find one or two that in instances do, but they also self-select. And this I get even from like the guy from the Manhattan Institute. They self-select in terms of parents and students.
I'm going back to what you said about private entities running housing. And what I'm saying is,
well, you know, you generalize it to like, yes. And these charters entities,
they're better.
Well, they're not. I mean, the data shows that they're not.
You're saying the private organizations like nonprofits that run housing are not better than NYCHA.
No, I'm saying these things aren't scalable. That you're going to rely on.
Let's have a whole bunch of smaller companies doing it. That's my whole point.
Yes, but you can't. And I drew an analogy, Larry. I know you hold on. You hold on.
Public housing.
You hold on. I drew an analogy to charter schools. There are some charter schools that are okay, but their ideas are not scalable. And they're not scalable because they have to serve a broader population. And we know from the data that charter schools as a whole do not do a better job than public schools.
Charter schools are not even in my plan.
No, I understand. I was making an analogy. Larry, you know what that is. Now,
charter schools are still
talk
government
about
schools.
10th to 12th grade. You don't think that's necessary for kids?
Government charter schools are still government schools.
Let's talk about, we started about education.
Let's do it. I love it. I got to find us we got to agree again, Sam, before we end. We got to agree on something again.
I think it's getting increasingly unlikely.
Oh, come on.
10th to 12th grade.
Yes.
Not necessary for everybody to attend. Let's get these let's get these 16-year-olds into the workforce.
Not necessarily. Let me explain how it works. In my plan at 10th grade, which is 16, you take a test, a government test. You should be happy about that. A government monopoly test that if you pass that test, you get a high school diploma. Done. You have a high school diploma now. Now, our Constitution in New York State says we must pay for grades 1 through 12. That's what it says on Constitution. So I have to pay for 11th and 12th grade. That I have to pay for. No worries. I'll do that. Here's how I do it. I will copy the model that I had when I left the Marine Corps. I left the Marine Corps. I got the GI Bill. And then Marine Corps said, here's X dollars, and you have Y years to use it. I forgot what it was. I left the Marine Corps 30 years ago. So whatever that money was, that's what they gave me. Every kid now gets a credit, $20,000 and 5 years to use it. Now, what do I want to do? I want to then give them the options. You're 16. You just graduated high school in New York State. You have 4 options. Option number 1, go to a trade school. If you think, hey, I don't want to go to school. I want to be a plumber. I want to be a carpenter. Go to a 2-year trade school. Government's going to pay $20,000 for it. Go either get your license if you can, or be ready for an apprenticeship, depending on what trades you go through. Number 1, the state desperately needs trades like there's no tomorrow. The average tradesman in New York State's over 50 when they should be over 30. Big problem. We're importing labor from other places. We should be trying to have more New York kids doing work. You don't want that. No worries. Go to a prep school. Right now, for most kids in New York State, too many of them, 11th and 12th grade is smoking weed and study hall and playing video games and then they can't even bother one to go to college. They're not ready for college. Now the average kid going to college takes 6 years to graduate, not 4. Disaster. We're not prepping most of our kids for school. In certain areas in Rochester, which is some of the worst school districts in the entire country, if you are a black male, the odds of you graduating high school, the last time I checked was under 20%. Those numbers may have changed since COVID. I'm not sure. The last time I checked was under 20%, the chance of you to graduate high school as a black male in certain Rochester school districts. So what am I saying? If you want to go to trade school, great. Or go to a prep school. You think you might want to go law, you might want to go medicine. You don't know. Go to a 2-year prep school so that when you go to your college, you are ready. Instead of right now, for most college kids, the first year of college is 13th grade because the kids aren't ready. You will be ready. You went to a prep school. Or let's say you're super smart. You're bored in school. You're the kid who's going to be a doctor.
I get the idea.
Go get your 2-year degree now.
I get the idea. I get the idea.
16-year-old kids an opportunity to make choices.
So, all right. So on one hand, these 16-year-olds are just getting high and they're playing video games and they can't graduate high school.
I just want to preemptively concede a point to Larry here and say this does kind of describe my experience. So, it's not totally wrong.
And then you're saying the thing to do is to give these guys and gals, guys, the opportunity to make a key life decision with $20,000 in the bank. We're going to turn them into, like, on one hand, they're such F-ups that they can't do anything.
Not what I
except
said.
for playing
Please
games.
don't say that.
Okay.
I did not say that. That's
They're getting high. All they're doing is getting high and smoking. And wait, I'm sorry. Larry, let me finish. I'm trying to assess what you said.
Individual.
You cannot pretend that you didn't just say these guys are just getting high and playing video games.
Yeah, but I didn't use that accent.
That's true.
Didn't use the accent. Come on.
Make me do an impression of you. They're getting high and they're playing video games.
That's true.
And instead, what we do is say, make a key decision about the future, your entire life right now.
No. 2 things you're wrong. Number 1, you said they're all F-ups. It's not the kids, it's the system. The kids aren't
systems
up.
Making them get high and play video games.
Because they're bored in school, they don't care, they have no purpose, they have no community. Yes, the system, not the kids. The kids want to do great, but the system says, go to school and learn stuff that you don't care about, be unhappy. That's what it says. We're not treating the kids like adults, so they don't act like adults. So, the second part you said, which is a life-changing. No.
Your kids,
the average kid in this world is going to have at least 5 careers, not 5 jobs.
I understand.
5 careers.
I understand.
This is not life-changing.
This
is a decision they can make now at 16. Hold on. This is the most important piece. You said, for a kid right now, they're making these decisions and screwing up at 26. The price for failure at 26 is way higher than the price for failure at 16.
Okay.
If they make a mistake at 16, I also give them 5 years. I'm allowing them to make a mistake. I'm allowing them to screw up and to learn their own.
But you're also depriving them of those last 2 years of high school. So now let me ask you this.
Because that's so valuable.
I actually do think it is. I think your idea sounds interesting to me, and I would like to do that, institute that maybe after high school and roll it into a free college program. But to deprive kids of the last 2 years of high school because the dropout rate, you cite the dropout rate as if it's a bad thing.
Okay.
But then you say that these students who drop out at that time also have the ability to make this assessment as a consumer as to where, what they're going to do with that money that has been diverted from educating them and making sure they get an education for those last 2 years. Now, if you want to add this on, but this is all, ultimately, every plan that you have, and the reason why we spend so much time on funding, right? Because I asked you about education and I asked you about daycare, and you want to send people to unlicensed daycare facilities.
No, I don't. Stop saying that. This is not a left or right or an all or none. You can still have daycare. I'm not removing daycare. I'm giving people an option
of dropping their kids off on unlicensed,
by the family court and CPS. And they're like, no, if they do
Larry,
their children away.
Listen, churches have daycare centers. They exist.
But many of them can't anymore because of the regulatory system. I'm saying allow that to exist.
So unlicensed daycare centers is unregulated.
That to exist, yes.
Okay, so anybody can open up a daycare center if they're a nonprofit.
Correct, if they want to.
And it will be free.
No, they can decide what they want. All I'm saying is you don't go to jail. So you don't get your kids taken away. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
So if you say, wait a minute,
but that doesn't anyway address
Emma's house. I think Emma's a bad person.
No, I get it. I get the idea.
Drop your kid off at regular
no
daycare.
Responsibility for dropping the kids off at any place for daycare. I get that. Okay. But that was not really an answer to my question. It was not an answer to my question, which is like, I don't know these people are, how you're going to get daycare, just like they're going to charge. Those people aren't just hanging out their house. And I was talking about free universal daycare if you want to help women choose to not terminate their pregnancy.
I have one more piece. And by the way,
wait a second. Let me just finish my point for a second, Larry.
Go ahead, please.
My point was the reason why, sort of. The reason why you keep going to the funding mechanism, because everything ends up being, how do we reduce taxes as opposed to expand services? So like we could add 2 years,
All right, this is probably as good a place as any to pause. I'm actually really happy about this last twist, because I think Sam is finally trying to address basically the complaint that I made the last time we paused for a while, which is like that, okay, we keep on getting caught up in the weeds of like these sort of complicated libertarian workarounds, right? For how we can help address these problems without anybody paying, high taxes. But why are we talking about that, right? Why are we just talking about like whether actually, whether lower taxes are actually intrinsically good or not, right? Whether like it's actually okay to raise taxes if you're paying for daycare, in that example, right, et cetera. So, which I think is going to be the more fundamental ideological disagreement, between the two of them, right? Not like, even though, but I will say, even now that he's clarified it, I guess let's put it this way. I think it really depends how old these kids are. They're getting dropped off at these places, right? That I'd want that clarified, right? I think because it's I think that like the idea that you're just going to completely deregulate daycare, right? Anybody can, I don't know. I guess we could all just anybody could just stick a sign in their lawn and say this is a daycare. And I'm a little skeptical about whether that's going to have good results, but like, I think it's probably good to have some regulations on the standards that people have to meet before they're entrusted with the care of like small children. But I
agree with that. I'm not sure. Like he's still, like, as Sam was pointing out there too, he still seems to be kind of making the argument that lowering taxes will fix daycare costs and education problems and things like that. I mean, I don't know whether it's automatically the case, whether you can fix these problems, whether you're decreasing taxes or increasing funding to them. But he's not really explaining how one thing leads to the other, as far as I can understand, other than that it will lower taxes. And I mean, it seems like lowering costs of daycare would be a good idea, and maybe having it free would be a good idea too. But if you're not doing that, then maybe like we were talking about before, maybe something like increasing wages so workers can have more money to more easily be able to afford daycare. There should be something like some sort of mechanism that can help with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think his argument for why all these things are supposed to have the trickle down effects he thinks they'll have, that the with the lower property taxes, the rent will be stabilized, and with the whatever Rube Goldberg thing I've lost track of is supposed to lower daycare costs, and and all that, right? Like I think the argument in a lot of these cases is like, well, if you make it possible for people to make as much money, like landlords, for example, to make as much money without raising rent, then at least some of them will do that. And then the competitive pressure from some of them doing that will mean that the others will have to, right? So they're not outcompeted. And, maybe this is a big bet to place on it. It panning out that way, right? That I think you're right. I mean, I think you said this one of the first times we paused, that like the really fundamental thing is just that there's this a priori commitment to like lower taxes are good, and that's really driving everything else, because he's got all these predictions about positive effects he thinks that like lowering this or that tax will get. And it's like, I don't know, maybe some of them will even come true, but like, how confident are you about all of these, right? And like, why is this the one tool that you want to use for everything? And it seems like it seems like there's a little bit of a switch going on, right? Because it's like, is that really why you want to lower taxes? Because like you're so sure that's going to have all these like down the line effects, or do you basically want to lower taxes because you actually have this like in principle objection to higher taxes?
Yeah, and this is one thing that it kind of annoys me about libertarians, or at least people who see the free market as having this sort of like magic metaphysical power. It reminds me of when Jordan Peterson was doing that debate with Kyle Kulinski, and he started talking about free markets. And he was like, there are billions of calculations all the time in the free market, and we can't just have the government making all that decisions. Like, how are you going to make the choice between increasing the funding for this and like whether a child can go to school or not? You can't do that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and it's frustrating, because Peterson's like latched on to like a little bit of a real thing, but I think he doesn't quite but I think he has a pretty superficial handle on it, and I think he's trying to extend it way past the point where it makes sense, right? So it's like one thing to say there are these information problems with trying to like plan everything all the time, and like that's a real thing, and that's like a real problem, but like but also like in that Kulinski debate, when Peterson is doing what you just said, he's trying to apply that to stuff like healthcare, where it's like, okay, but come on, dude, we kind of know that state planning actually works pretty well in healthcare. Like we actually, like the data is actually in on this, that that we can look at we could look at health outcomes in Canada and the UK and the US, and et cetera, and we know that it actually works quite well. And again, there's a reason why, even though there are various schemes that are floated to reform like Canadian Medicare in ways that would actually privatize parts of it or whatever, like by and large, right? Like even Canadian conservatives don't run for office and be like, oh, this system just shouldn't exist at all, right? We should just
I've noticed that before. Like even the most far right candidates in conservative parties in Canada, none of them ever mention privatizing healthcare, and there are some problems with that system sometimes. Sure. But overall, I think it's a good idea for it to be free for
Yeah.
everyone. And it's not as if it's inherently the case that if you nationalize something like healthcare, for example, that it's going to lead to like Stalinist Russia or some shit like that.
No, I mean, clearly not. Right. And yeah, and it's enough of a success story that, yeah, if they did go around saying we should just like switch to the American healthcare system, they know they can't, like they would never win another election if they did that. Right. So they can't say that. And yeah, so I think like Peterson's like, again, there's like a germ of something real there, but he's trying to apply it just to this point of silliness, right? With stuff like healthcare, and again, like the thing that I find frustrating is with with watching this conversation, or remember my own conversation with Sharpe, is that like he has tons of things to say about the sort of technocratic details of how to implement this kind of moderate libertarian vision. Fine. Right. I mean, that's if we all started from the premise that that's the vision we want to implement, right? Then like, then let's go ahead and have that discussion. But the question is why should we want to, right? Why should we want the funding mechanism for schools to be privatized? Why should we want to have, why should we think that the best thing we can do for daycare, that to like give more people daycare is just to like make it legally easier to, to drop people off at a VFW hall that hasn't actually like proven that they're up to the standards of a licensed daycare center. Why should we do that instead of having state provided daycare, right? Why should we, et cetera, right? Like, and he wants to talk at this really detailed level. Okay, here's this like really specific benefit I think my thing might have, and it would have it a little bit, and I'm not even saying it would have it that much, but it's like, okay, great, but like, why not just do the more basic things where we just like raise taxes and then like use that to just directly pay for these things? And if you're
in terms of taxes too, isn't it, if you're talking about how lowering taxes can help people be able to afford daycare, isn't it the case that if you make below a certain amount of money, you don't pay taxes anyway? So if you lower taxes, then it wouldn't help the people who need help the most in terms of being able to afford that?
Yeah, I mean, so right, there are people who are below the income threshold where they owe any income taxes. So unless we're getting into like negative income tax or something, then no, that wouldn't help them. I'm not even totally clear that that's what Larry was saying. I think again, there was some complicated mechanism going on where we lower taxes over here, and we like, whisper sweetly to the private capital that, that they'll give them a really good deal on these school bonds over here, and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then this will all have this effect down the line of, cheaper daycare and cheaper rent and all that stuff. But again, the real question is like, why should you have to do it that way? Right? Like, why should you have to like try to seduce the hedge fund into investing in something else so that they're not invested in real estate, so that the price of real estate goes down, right? Why not just say like, let's build lots of like, let's just directly build housing, right, and provide it to people, right, that they which, and not means tested either. So because that's like a big part of the problem with a lot of American public housing, that like, one, it's often built in this way historically, where it's like, okay, let's keep it away from like where the nice neighborhoods are, and that ends up causing a lot of economic problems in itself. And two, it's because you're only eligible for a lot of this stuff, right, if you can like prove that you really desperately need it, right? So you're keeping everybody at the bottom end of the income spectrum like together, right? So it's, of course, it's going to concentrate all the social pathologies that go with that, right? I mean, like if it's only people who are living in poverty are over here, right? Then like everything bad that's associated with poverty is going to be concentrated over there. Whereas if you have something like the Viennese model, right, where in Vienna there are there's multi-income level public housing that's like very popular and like and is like desirable enough that people like stay on waiting lists for a long time to get into it, right? Or like Singapore, where a lot of, like some ridiculous percentage of the housing is publicly owned. These seem like much better. These seem like much better models, and again, I just don't believe that Sharpe's only objection to doing that stuff is like, well, I think that if we do this exact thing, that it'll have slightly better pragmatic effects or whatever. It's like, that rings a little hollow to me. I want you to just tell me if you've got some principle about freedom or something that says that like we can't have higher taxes. Just give me the principle and let's argue about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the magic of the almighty free market will fix it somehow.
Yeah. All right, let's keep watching.
It's me. We could add 2 years on both ends of the education, but you don't want to do that. What you want to do is come up with so-called innovative plans that actually provide, there's no evidence of any of the efficacy of these plans. The only clear result of all these plans that you've proposed are less taxes. On landlords, on corporations, and I guess on individuals in terms of their property taxes.
Yes. So 2 parts. Number 1, I will cover the part you also mentioned. There's one more piece to it. Again, this is a systemic problem. I have to have multiple plans to fix this. Okay. None of the individuals
who's going to support these plans that you're talking about? Like, I mean, all of these because it seems to me that like what you do is you start with how do we cut taxes?
No,
and then you go,
how I start.
Because I've never met an educator, and I've interviewed probably, I don't know, at least dozens, but maybe 100 on this program over the course of 18 years, who said, you know what we really need to do? Less school. We got to get the kids out at 16. And I've never, ever come across an educator who has ever said, those last 2 years of school, unnecessary.
Well, there are 2 things. One, if that's what you do for a living, you're never going to say your job's unnecessary. So that's number 1, clearly.
Well, they're not teachers. They're just educators, people who study education.
Hold on. Are they administrators or teachers?
No, they're people who study education. They've probably been teachers, but they're not worried about their job being lost.
Let me tell you what teachers tell me. And I've been doing this for 5 years. And I'm sure I've talked to at least 100 teachers. And 99 out of 100, and I'm making that number up because it sounds cool.
I imagine.
Yes. Tell me, Larry, your ideas are good. And here's why. What my ideas do is they eliminate extra administrators. Right now, we have places in New York State where there are more administrators than there are teachers. If you look at the number 1 reason why teachers leave the field, it's because of over-administration. We have our teachers get master's degrees. They get all kind of issues. And
it is the government test, like you suggested. Actually, it's the government test. It's the that teachers leave because they don't have the freedom to teach in the way that they want to.
Yes,
but you've instituted the okay. So
I'm agreeing with you. Yes, again, look, another thing we agree upon. You're right. That's the reason teachers leave, because we have them jump through all these hoops. Then they show up in the classroom and they're controlled by administrators, right? They don't want to be controlled by administrator. I don't want them controlled by administrators either. I want them controlled by local schools, by parents, by PTAs. I'd rather have them controlled by that than by some administrators. If I have to have them controlled, that's what I'd rather have them do it. So my plan actually does that. But let me cover the last 2 years piece.
Well, but
now what happens in the 2 year piece?
You eliminate the last 2 years of school. You're also eliminating the teachers. Like there's no impact on the ratio of administrators to teachers, are there?
Yes. And let me tell you why. Once you start funding specifically through the fund that I mentioned, there's a huge chunk of administrators who their job is to follow all the federal and state guidelines for money. That's a huge chunk of them. I don't know how many, but it's a big chunk. That chunk of people are no longer required. So if school districts want to fire them, they may, up to them. I'm not going to fire any teachers or administrators But districts may decide, you know what? You're a grant writer for the state. We don't require a grant writer anymore. You can go away.
Grant writers are not inhibiting what the teachers are doing.
Correct. Well, yes, they are, because to get the grant, there's strings attached. So you have to do X, Y, and Z so you get the grant money, which is why they just get attacked. You must do these things so we can get our money. That's how they control teachers, through cash. Once that cash goes away, those administrators go away, those strings go away. So now locally you can create your own strings. That's how you get rid of administrators.
But when you say locally you're going to have your own strings, the teachers are not going to be the ones who are getting that cash. Then there's just going to be somebody else who's going to be doing it.
You're assuming that we would all of a sudden add a bunch more administrators. Look, some districts
might. It's just the
possible
number of administrators. I mean, somebody's going to be making the rules for what is taught.
Yes, and you remember, Sam, you're old enough to remember when you went to high school or junior high school, we didn't have 45,000 vice principals.
You know what I do remember from high school? I went to high school in Massachusetts. And you know what I remember? Proposition 3, or was it 13, where taxes were cut. And all of a sudden, a third of our classes went away. And we had no arts, and we had no theater. Yep. And we had half sports teams.
Yep.
That's what I remember, what happened when the taxes were cut.
And do you know why so many places in New York State that happens? In New York State, we are funded. Our average teacher makes about $70,000 per year. An average administrator makes almost $200,000 a year. We're not underfunded in New York State, right? We give $28,000, $29,000 per kid in New York State. We're not underfunded.
The problem with education, from every educator that I have talked to, is essentially we're asking schools to make up for income and low income areas.
Yep.
There is not a single educator that you can talk to who doesn't do this, who doesn't study this, who wouldn't be able to tell you the outcomes on education when you just provide them what the median income is in any given area code. I mean, that's the issue. But
you're not wrong, but that's not an issue in New York State. In New York State, it's not an issue. In New York State, teachers aren't at the poverty level.
No, it's not teachers. It's the students. It's the students. It's the students.
Agreed. So imagine if that I'm going to say,
imagine if we had less taxes and real estate, and then magically what happens is everything gets cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's not how it works.
That's not what I'm saying. Imagine if instead of us having to worry about paying administrators $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year, I'm not making those numbers up. That exists in New York State. Imagine if we were, instead of paying them $300,000 or $400,000 or $500,000 a year,
we could
drop a bunch of these administrators in any local district and put that money either into a school or into a teacher or into a classroom.
So you're telling me the theory of cutting the last 2 years of high school is really just a very, very roundabout way to have less school administration?
No, that's not the only thing. That's a bonus that comes at the end.
Well, what is the?
Let me tell you. You keep cutting me off and trying to get
We've been talking for an hour, and I asked you this question literally an hour ago.
We could talk for hours. Let me go then.
You just spent so much time on explaining how you were going to get rid of taxes, and not like
that's all you heard.
Well, no, I heard you're going to cut the last 2 years of high school, and you have not addressed that.
To go to specialized schools.
Why can't we do that?
Why are specialized schools a bad thing? Imagine
because
if you're a teacher.
Because you're saying two things, Larry. You're saying that the kids don't have the responsibility to stay in school.
Correct.
And then, but we're going to give them the responsibility to survey these options here and decide which one that they think they should do, as opposed to taking the $20,000, I guess, and maybe going to blow it. I mean,
it's a credit for school. So
it's a credit for school. And so the other kids who don't want to go to school are just not going to go.
Correct. Some won't go.
Why wouldn't we do this with college? Why wouldn't we do this for college age students? Like, what is at age 16 that is so special about the age 16? The only thing I can see there is that it saves the taxpayers,
and that's a bad
money.
Thing.
Yeah, well, I think there's a reason why we had public education in this country.
And there's a reason why we lose 200,000 to 300,000 New Yorkers every single year to Florida and Texas. There's a reason why they're flocking out of our state in droves. There's a reason why we can't sell houses.
It's because of the cost of housing.
Yes, taxes and all types of things.
What are the cost of
Affordability,
housing?
opportunity,
The cost of housing.
of course, safety. But those three, of course. And you're like, let's just pay more money.
Larry, for you, it all comes down to how do we cut taxes? That the only reason why people would leave here is cutting taxes. Texas is what? 50th in education or 49th?
It's not only because of that.
What is it? What is
I don't know
Texas?
what Texas is. I have no idea.
You have no idea what Texas is?
Texas. I have no idea. I don't know. You can look it up. You guys got like 18 people. They can look it up.
We got a couple people here who can look it up. We'll look it up.
I don't know what it is.
I mean, it is because people who don't care about.
Hold on. Let's assume you're right, and it's 50th. It's the worst.
Okay.
If people are going to that state, how bad is our state? If you're right and Texas 50th, oh my, we should be embarrassed. We got to fix something. I'm giving you an answer to fix it. Let me cover my last piece. Why do we go to the last 2 years? Because now kids are choosing their schools. They're going to go to a school that they feel excited about. Oh, I want to go to a science 2 years prep school. I want to go to a so-and-so school. I'm going to go to this school. They want to go to specialized schools.
Are there going to be administrators at this school?
City for a while.
Is this going to create more or less administrators?
It'll be, those schools are going to be private schools.
I see.
They're private schools.
They're private schools. And how will we be sure? Like, I mean, are they going to be like for-profit colleges?
Maybe. I don't know. Let them do what they want. Why do I care? You're choosing.
Because I am familiar with for-profit colleges and their scams to get government money.
Colleges are scams. But yes, you're right. Yes.
So why would you set up a system that completely invites that?
No.
And I presume that they're totally unregulated. They're just businesses, right?
And let's just for a moment that you are correct that all these schools are scam schools. Say you're right. You're right. They're all scam schools. Guess what happens then? If you're correct and they're all scam schools, then parents and teachers and kids learn at 16, 17, oh my God, this is scam schools. Guess what? They won't go to scam colleges.
That's weird.
Even if you're right.
Well, wait a second.
Even if you're right.
That's
and I don't
weird.
think you'll be right. I don't see that being true. Because private schools
have
are
just
pretty good
forgiven
people.
billions of dollars in loans to scam schools.
Yes, so let's not do that anymore.
Not forgive the loans?
No, let's get kids know what the hell they want to do by the time they're 18 or 19, so that when they go to college, they make better choices and decisions.
Do you think Trump University was, do you think that was a valid school?
So this is Trump University now?
Well, I mean, you're saying essentially they'll set up Trump universities and we'll, instead of setting,
there's still rules for setting up a school. You gotta be accredited still in New York State. Trump wasn't that.
Okay, so
University wasn't that.
So okay, let's get into the regulation. So we got to have regulation for these schools. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So
who
we
says
do
I'm against. Who says there's no regulation?
They're all private. They're all private, and so you just said that if they're scam schools.
Yes, if they scam the system, is it possible some schools will scam our system? Yes, there are high schools now that are garbage that don't work. High schools now that don't work. There are high schools now that are completely broken and don't work. So, of course, there will be some schools that scam the system. Currently, there are schools that scam the system in our actual system.
No, but there is oversight to the extent that these schools are underfunded or
underfunded, of course.
Yeah, of course, because we ask these schools again to do stuff that we're not doing as a society, and we certainly can't achieve by cutting taxes.
So let me go to the other piece, which you may enjoy. It is what I call the GIB, which is the graduated income boost. And that is across New York State, to where it's similar to Milton Friedman's idea of a negative income tax. We create that here in New York State, to where people who are making less than 30.
Okay, before we go on to his next idea, you want to take a minute on the school stuff?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm interested to hear what you think about his school idea, because I'm not really sure what to think about it, because I mean, for me, my last 2 years of high school was not that impactful. I didn't get interested in learning until after I graduated from high school. Yeah. But I never had any interest for trade school, and I'm not sure what I would have done with $20,000, because I wasn't ready to go to university yet. I mean, if you could save up money for university, you could use it to go towards that. You could buy a car, or
Well,
I mean, there are a
he
lot
said
of
it
different
would,
things you could do.
well, he said you couldn't do that. He said it would go towards it would be like $20,000 of, I don't remember what phrase he used, but it was something to the effect of you couldn't just cash it out, right? You'd have to apply it towards school in some form.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't. I mean, look, I sort of half jokingly, said that like his description of like what people do in their last couple of years of school is not unlike some of my experience, and it's certainly true that in my case I didn't really get interested in school until college, but it's also, again, I think this is one of the places where it's useful to sort of peel back the like technocratic layers of detail that he's laying down, and like try to get what the more basic principle is here, right? Since if the idea, like, if it's just that you can, like, I mean, there are actually already people who start college early, right? I mean, that obviously exists, right? That the but like if the idea is just like you make it a little bit easier to go from your free public high school to your free public college, then okay, cool, right? That sounds I don't, that's probably unobjectionable. That you're still you're still in school, and maybe you get more interesting classes sooner. So you can like test into that or something, fine, right? But like also you only get to, but it seems like in his system you only get to do that like the 2 years of college are only free if you take them at 17 and 18 is what I was
Yeah.
hearing, right?
Yeah. I
It's
mean,
like, well,
I remember when I graduated from high school, like a lot of people were talking about how it's weird that our culture expects you to know what you want to do for your career when you're 17. And like I think Sam was right in pointing out that he was saying that the people in their last 2 years of high school are smoking weed and playing video games, yet they also are supposed to want to know what they're going to do with their future
yeah, exactly.
when
And
they're
like,
even younger than that.
yeah, totally. And by the way, Joe brings up Freddie DeBoer thinks kids should be able to drop out younger. Yeah, that was, he says that in a book that I actually really like, The Cult of Smart. But that's one of the parts I found least convincing because I think it is, I don't really think that somebody who's like 13, 14, whatever, like, I think it's okay to be a little paternalistic and say stick with school, kid, and you can make your decisions later, but like let's at least give you the foundation, so you have that, right? If you maybe you'll use it and maybe you won't, but right, we'll at least give that to you. And I think yeah, I mean, I don't know why, like, I don't know what possible case there is for 2 years of free college if you're 17 or 18 that wouldn't apply to if you're 18, 19, 20. So and I think Larry was being a little glib when he was like, oh, most people change careers 5 times or whatever. It's like, yeah, but let's also not pretend that if you didn't go to the last 2 years of high school, it's going to be just as easy to like be 30 and be like, man, I should have gotten those last 2 years of high school,
Yeah.
and like go back and try to do it then.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I mean, it's like, no, that is actually like, I'm just not going to go. I'm just going to stop school right at this time is actually a pretty major life decision.
And a lot of people would make that decision just because they don't like school.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, I think I think there are a lot of people who I think that, I think at that age, if you're like, hey man, you want to just like, just drop out and like go work at a coffee shop or something, I might have done it just because I was like, oh God, I hate this shit, right? Like,
Yeah.
let's just go do that. And then I would have regretted it, right? Like, I think that, again, I think that there's a, I think a little, I think a little bit of authoritarianism when you're talking about teenagers, can be justified within reason. But yeah, I think that it's a much bigger life decision than Larry Sharpe is portraying it as being, and it could have much bigger consequences. And again, the real question is like, why not? I mean, okay, if people want to drop out, we can argue about exactly when they should be able to do that and all that, right? But I mean, like, the real question is like, should you have, is what options are people going to have, right? Like, is, like, are we going to, fund schools less than they are right now, right? Or more like they are right now? And like, with his privatization scheme for the funding, it sounded like the only way the taxpayers are going to come in is like if there's like a stock market crash and they have to bail out, the private funding mechanism. And so I'm not. It sound and he was very dismissive of claims that schools are underfunded, which we know, right? I mean, like, there are tons of teachers who have to take other jobs in the summer or who have to pay for school supplies, out of pocket. There are tons of, like, if you look at like places, maybe they're not in New York. I don't, I can't claim to know the like situation more specifically in New York State, but like, if you look at parts of the country where there are like big ongoing like teachers union battles and possibly strikes and stuff like that, class sizes are always a big issue. And that too is a funding thing, right? Because if you lower class sizes, you have to hire more teachers. So I think, so it sounds like he doesn't really want to fund schools, certainly not more, right? Because he's so contemptuous of the claim that they're underfunded. And he doesn't want to, like, okay, maybe you can take the money that you would have gotten for the last 2 years of high school and spend it on college or trade school. But like, what about just saying that, like, you can, let's just do all, like, you can graduate. Like, if you want to be a go-getter and graduate early from high school, fine. If you want to graduate on time when you're 18, fine. And either way, right, you can go to college without paying tuition, which, the Bernie Sanders plan for that is, was like funded the whole thing with like a pretty small Wall Street transaction tax. Certainly there are countries in the world that have tuition-free higher education. There's states in the United States that used to have tuition free, the CUNY, right? City University of New York, back when that was City College, that was tuition free. Like, so it just, and again, I think he would object to all of this because he objects to, for the same reason that he would object to just like taking like apartments that are owned by hedge funds into public ownership. So, so you could, so you could just provide them to people much more cheaply, or, that just to have like maybe a sliding scale based on income, for rent, for example. The same reason he'd object to that, right? Which is like, oh, we don't want to like raise taxes and then use that to pay for all this stuff, or we don't want to like actually just take stuff from the hedge funds, right? Because of some sort of underlying libertarian principles. And I know I've gotten a little boring on this because I've said some version of this like 10 times. So that's because it's driving me crazy watching this thing, right? It's like, just tell me what like the libertarian principles are that are driving this whole thing. We can have a real conversation about that instead of being like, no, Sam, there are 4 pieces. See, we've only done the first 3 pieces, and then there's this other piece, and I think that'll help a little bit with this, and that other one will help a little bit with that. And it's like, no, just like if you think it would be unacceptable to just pay for people to go to college from 18 to 22, in addition to what's spent on public schools, which meant that you need to like raise more tax money. Fine, right? Just like tell me why you think it's unacceptable, and then we can, have a real argument.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also though, I like what he said about how there are way too many administrators at schools, but I think it would make, I mean, to me at least, it would make more sense to maybe have far less administrators and then use the money that you save from that and use it to pay teachers more and or hire more teachers, and maybe that would be much more likely to increase the quality of education.
Yeah, I think so. Although I also think that like some of in a way, Larry actually alluded to this earlier, that like what some of the administrators are doing are, like writing grants and stuff. They're like navigating like bureaucratic loopholes to like find funding. But yeah, so I mean, I think that might be part of the problem, but yeah, sure. I mean, I'm generally friendly to the idea of getting rid of administrators and using it to, and using it to hire, to hire more teachers, I think on the college level too. But I just, I just think that like all of this stuff, it seems like the entire debate is being conducted in a way, and I think Sam's doing his best with this, but I think the entire debate is being conducted in a way that that sort of leaves the most important things just kind of like lurking in the background, right? Because like, and again, I think to his credit, Sam does keep trying to like bring it back to this, which is like, don't tell me like, yeah, I understand we've only run through 15 of the 20 points of your 20-point plan, right? But like, like rather than arguing about each and every single one of these points and whether they would help a little bit or whatever, like why is it that you basically want to do the market friendly stuff that you don't, basically want to do the social democratic stuff? Like that's going to be the real nub of the disagreement between Larry and Sam.
Yeah, for sure.
$6,000 a year will get some form of check from New York State, again funded by the same fund that I talked about earlier, the New York State Social Trust, which is I also call the NIST. If that begins to happen now, the working mom will get some cash from the state. It doesn't get rid of her federal funds if she has any. It doesn't change anything else, but she gets some extra cash. With that extra cash, she can, if she wants to, deal with healthcare or deal with local childcare. She can begin to make these things happen. I'm okay with this idea. Look, I come from a poor neighborhood. I know what it's like to be poor.
So it's essentially like the child tax credit, for instance.
Similar, except
we fund it with a private fund that we hope doesn't really have a dedicated funding source.
Well,
it has one
issue.
only
there
that
are examples of this being successful.
I'm sure
I'm not making this up.
There are also
Norway
examples.
Does it. Singapore does it.
There are also examples of these type of funds going belly up. And when you talk about Norway, you're talking about a society, you talk about a system where there's a lot of other mechanisms for support in that society. And they also have a much higher tax rate than we do.
But they actually tax their poor more than they tax their wealthy by percentage.
They also have much higher taxes across the board because their poor to the extent that they have a poor, it's not the way that we identify poor. Correct. Because they have health care, they have child care, they have mandated jobs. I mean, they have job guarantees. So you're comparing apples to oranges there with that. And
all I'm saying is
in a place like Singapore, you also have healthcare, which is heavily regulated and price capped. I mean, to put all these eggs in that private basket without any of the other support systems that existed around it, I think is really dangerous. No, we don't have enough. We need to add in this state. Like, for instance, healthcare. You want to do with healthcare. You have these health savings accounts. You call them something else, but they're basically health savings accounts. And the idea being that we would get rid of Medicare, or I should say Medicaid, convert it into health savings accounts, but then use.
We're not getting rid of it. No. The idea is right now, Medicaid and Medicare, they have an idea how much money you're going to spend every year based upon whatever actuaries, right? They know, okay, he's got this pre-existing condition, this amount of money, this amount of age, whatever, and they have an idea. For the sake of argument only, they think Sam Seder is going to spend $4,000 a year in Medicare and medical expenses, whatever the number is. So I'm saying, give you the account with the debit card, allowing you to go to any provider you want, use your debit card. Medicare doesn't go away. If you come into a problem, you can still go back to Medicare if you want to. You go back to Medicaid if you want to. You can. What I'm saying is they give you a card that you can use in the private sector if you want to. This is voluntary. You can just stay on Medicaid, Medicare. I'm not getting rid of anything. If you choose to use that, here's what I believe will happen. And I may be wrong. And everything I'm saying, I could be wrong. But damn it, I'm giving you some serious ideas to fix things. And I'm not taking anything away. So you go to private doctors and you swipe your card. And all of a sudden the doctor says, wait a minute. I'm a private doctor who does not take healthcare. And you live in New York City. So health insurance. You know that there is becoming a two-tiered system in our city. People who take insurance and people who don't. You've seen it. You know it to be true. The wealthy go to those places. And the poor get stuck in managed care, which most of them are unhappy with managed care. Not all. Some are okay with it. Most are unhappy with managed care. I'm now giving someone who is poor or middle class the opportunity to go to wealthy doctors if they want to. That's what I'm doing with this. And when they see that, my hope is this. My hope is when doctors who are wealthy see this, go, I can get this money. Maybe I should lower my prices so that I can start getting this cash. I can start getting cash without having to have all the admin required for Medicaid, Medicare, and everything else.
Those wealthy doctors that you're talking about, at least in the context of New York City, they don't take health insurance.
That's my point. They wouldn't have to.
Right, but they don't take health insurance now. And by health insurance, I mean
they won't have to, is my entire point.
Larry, hold on for 1 second. Your argument is they're going to lower their prices because they don't have the... Excuse me.
They can get the card.
Can I finish?
Yes.
If I show up, Sam Seder, with $4,000 in cash, and a Medicaid recipient shows up with $4,000 in cash, these doctors who don't take insurance, my cash is the same as their cash.
Correct.
There's no incentive for them to lower their money unless they don't have any patients. But like you say, this is a two-tier system and they have plenty of patients. That's why they can afford to keep their prices so high.
Yep. Agreed.
Okay.
So
we're losing the Medicaid and Medicare benefits that we have on society's medical expenses because we have no price controls there. And we're again you're relying for some reason, your assumption is these doctors who can charge $1,000 a visit, let's say, are going to lower their prices because they're getting more business. But the fact is that they have all the business they need. That's why they can keep their prices at $1,000.
Let me give you an example of it actually working. I gave you examples. Nothing I said is not an example of success. Everything has an example of success. You may disagree with that example, but I'll give you an example of success. There is a medical system in in the country, that is next to our currently in New York State government-run system, right? And that is the non-essential medical field, right? LASIK eye surgery, cosmetic dentistry, body enhancements, things of that sort, right? Compared to the essential services, it's almost unregulated compared to that. It's regulated, of course, but relatively, it's hardly regulated at all. In every single case, every one of them, price has come down, accessibility has gone up. Before, when we were young and you had LASIK eye surgery, it was per eye. It was so expensive. Now anybody gets it.
I've heard the LASIK eye surgery example many times.
Cosmetic dentistry, body enhancements, insert thing here. Every place where what I said happened, meaning more people could get it.
What is true is luxury goods, when technology improves and more people start to use luxury goods, and when there's more people with more money who can afford luxury goods, their prices tend to come down. But essential goods like actual healthcare don't, unless their prices are capped. So the example that you're giving again is apples and oranges. Yes, TVs have also gotten cheaper.
Yep.
That's because everybody doesn't need a TV, A, and B, the technology has improved.
So hold on. Tell me what's gone up
but the difference
in costs.
What's gone up in cost in terms of like medicine?
Anything. I mean, whatever you're telling me, right? You're saying, well, these things are all luxuries. So you're saying the only thing that doesn't go up is luxuries? Everything else, the price I don't know. I'm sorry. The only thing that goes that doesn't go up is essentials. Hold on. I'm gonna write now. So you're saying only essential things rise in price? That's it?
No, I'm not saying only essential things rise in price, but essential things tend to rise in price because they're essential, and you cannot make the decision.
That government-run things rise in price, and everything you're saying that's going up in price is government-run. That's what I would say.
Excuse me. I can tell you from my own experience that my doctor, he is not government run at all. His prices have gone up. No.
I like that very much.
Yes, I have to submit. And my insurance company will give me some percentage of that back. And it's usually much less, actually, because they say, you know what? This is a baseline cost, and this is all that we cover. And with Medicare and Medicaid, it's even better because they actually contain costs.
I love what you're saying, because what I say often, people don't often believe me. I say there's a two-tiered system.
Yes, there is. And what
I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get more people in the lower system to experience the higher system.
But dude, that $4,000 is not going to go. If you're saying that a Medicaid person spends, we just said $4,000 a year, right?
Whatever that number is.
Okay. That $4,000 in the private sector is not going to go nearly as far. It's probably going to go, I don't know, maybe 80%, maybe 70%, maybe 60%.
You're probably right. I'm not against these things. But again, even if you do it,
what do you mean against these things? You're not. But okay, so they can go and blow some money on a doctor that they're not going to see again because they've got to go to their regular doctor with Medicaid.
Correct. Yes. Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Yes, you're correct.
And so how does that not raise prices? So all of a sudden my doctor now has 20 potential clients in any given day, or patients, I should say. And he's like, I only have time to see 10. I only have time to see 10. I guess I can raise my prices.
Maybe. Or
that's the way that people operate.
That's not always, not at all. People constantly shift and adjust and make changes. Of course they do.
If you own a bakery, I mean, you're turning this all into a consumer product. So let's use a bakery.
Okay.
I sell 10 pies a day.
Yep.
But all of a sudden I start getting 20 people coming to my bakery.
Yep.
What's the first thing that I do?
Probably hire somebody, I would assume.
No. What's the first thing I do?
Give them cake. I don't know. Help me out.
I raise the price of my pies.
Maybe. Okay,
no,
let's say
not maybe.
Yeah.
No, if I'm running a business, that's what I do.
So you get 20 people to come into your bakery, right? To buy your pies. I love that. Good for you. You're making some money. Life is good.
I have 10 pies.
Now, 10 of the people who came in, right, usually can't get your awesome pies because they don't have enough money. So they usually can't enjoy your awesome pies.
No, it's not because they don't have enough money. They're lining up. The 20 people have lined up because they want to buy my pies at $5. And I say, you know what? The pies are now going to be $5.25.
I'm going to give you an analogy now. Right? 10 people can't afford to have your awesome pies, and every day they come in and have your awesome pies. I'm good for them. But now there's 10 more people that have a choice now, short term, to go buy your awesome pies,
right?
Because they have the credit, right? So they go in, they go, let me try Sam's awesome pies, right? Well, if you just raise your prices to where they can't get your awesome pies because you only have 10, so only the first 10 people who show up get there, some people aren't going to get your awesome pies, even if you raise your prices.
Yeah,
right?
I'm a baker. I'm interested not in the entire world eating my pie. I'm interested in making money off my pies.
Okay, that's absolutely untrue. Most people will expand if they can. That's how most businesses work. But say you're the one guy who doesn't. I'm going to say you're the guy who says,
expand?
You know what? No matter what, I'm just selling 10 pies. I don't care what the market says. I'm selling 10 pies. To hell with them all. Okay,
the first
you
thing I
say
do
that.
is
I
raise
got you.
my prices.
Hold
Then
on,
the
yes,
second
because
thing,
you're going to sell 10 pies.
then
no
the
matter
second
what.
thing
You
is
don't
I
care.
hire another.
Yes, which is what I said.
Exactly.
Yes.
That's the second thing I do.
Correct.
Now, what
Yes.
is the analogy where the doctor
You're not
does
letting me
what?
finish my story because I think you know where I'm going with it already. My story
I
is
have
if you
no idea
decide
where
to
you're going.
only sell your 10 pies because you're hardcore Sam, and you're only selling 10 pies. Okay, great. Then those other 10 people are going to go someplace else to get their cool pies. And they're going to go to Emma's Bakery to get the cool pies. That's going to happen, right? And if she's hardcore like you, I'm only selling 10 pies. She's doing it too. Then they go to Matt's Bakery. And eventually they're going to be more people selling pies. And they're going to start lowering their prices. How do I know that? Because that's what always happens. What you're saying is, let's just give it more money. Or better, your other plan is, let's make Medicare for all and let's hope that the wealthy people in this country decide that's okay. That they go along with your plan and they control this country right now. They're not.
Well,
They're
wait
just
a
going to have
second.
their own system. They're going to make sure Medicare or whatever is garbage. And they're not even going to be part of your plan.
Okay, they're moving on to a new thing, but I just want to pause for a second at this part because I am fascinated by Larry's anti-Medicare for all argument, but I don't want to talk about that just yet. I want to talk about the fact that in this discussion that just happened for the last 5 minutes, the thing that Larry Sharpe, Libertarian candidate for governor of New York, has been adamantly denying, and lefty Sam Seder has been insisting on, Larry Sharpe has been denying, is just fucking supply and demand, right? That the
I've seen people saying that in the comments. Yeah,
no, a few people point out this comment, but it's like this has been like for the last 5 minutes. Like, is that really sounds like what he's denying, right? Because it's like this is the thing that like every libertarian who ever tells you, you don't understand basic economics, right? It's like this is what they're thinking of. Is exactly this point that Larry's denying, right? This like, the supply and demand curves in like, the first chapter of your, Econ 101 one book. That's like, yes, if there is much more of a demand for a product than there is supply of it, price will go up. I mean, this is not some weird socialist premise that Sam is appealing to. I mean, this is like something that in any other context, the libertarian guy in the discussion would be the first one to point out.
isn't it? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if Larry Sharpe has the same economics as someone like Dave Smith, but at least anarcho-capitalists like that, isn't it the case that they kind of like deny a lot of the basic arguments and of basic economics, and what they call basic economics is basically Austrian economics that denies some of those basic principles?
Sort of. So we actually Brett Lingle and I did this, like, I don't know, 2-part, maybe 3-part breakdown of a debate between Walter Block and it was David Friedman, Milton's son, right? And
Okay.
or actually both guys I've debated, but we were watching them debate each other about Austrian economics versus Chicago school economics. And David, like his late father, is representative of Chicago school economics. Walter is representative of Austrian school economics, and the guy Dave Smith's really into, Ludwig von Mises, and that's an Austrian economist, and there are or like Hayek, there are like there are a bunch of these guys, and as far as I could tell from that debate, this is going to sound like a caricature, but this really seemed to be what they were saying. I think the difference between them is not so much like those sorts of principles, right? Like what they think, like that it's not so much that like the Austrians are going to deny the supply and demand effects or anything like that. It's actually way weirder than that. As far as I can tell, what they're really disagreeing about is like whether we find out that those principles are true by like empirical observation, or whether we could just know a priori that that those are true. And
okay.
just through like pure logic, the was it axiology is what they call it. That which is this. I mean, it's not actually pure logic, obviously, because there's some like substantive premises that are just kind of intuition mongering, but like they would claim that these are all just arguments from first principles that like you can just demonstrate in advance that this is going to work this way, and you don't actually have to empirically test it. So it's so yeah, you're a philosophy guy. This is they actually think as is such a weird sentence to say, but the Austrian position is that it's a these are that there are synthetic a priori truths about economics, which is
like lowering taxes bad, government controlling things bad, those sorts of things.
Well, those are the results of them, right? But I mean, like the actual claims about like how economic transactions are going to work, right? They claim they literally claim are synthetic a priori truths, so like what like what Kant thought like the laws of mathematics or whatever were, right? They think that about this, that these it's so in other words, that it's a priori, you don't need evidence, and it's not analytic. It's not that you're just sort of deriving it from like the meanings of the words or something, but these are like synthetic. These are like substantive claims about how reality works that you can just like the way that like, I don't know, the way that if you're like Descartes, you think you can like prove the existence of God or something, right? That it's in that category, which is absolutely bizarre.
Right. And his synthetic a priori claim is that I know that I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, for Descartes, that's one of them, right? And he's also got like a version of the ontological argument for the existence of God and etc. But yeah, like these are the, but yeah, like these are supposed to be things. Again, he thinks. I mean, he doesn't have the terminology yet. Kant makes up these words, but like but yeah, that would definitely be an example of it, right? Descartes thinks that there are certain things that you can just sort of see by the light of reason. You don't have to. You don't have to empirically prove them, or you don't, they're not just functions of like logic and what we mean by words or anything like that, right? That these are like substantive things about the world that you can know just by thinking about them. So
yeah, I thought it was interesting when they were talking about a bakery and the number of pies that they have. Like, it seems to me like libertarians tend to see it as an inherent moral good for business owners to make more profits, but they also seem to think it's just automatically the case that business owners more profits or making more profits benefits consumers and society as a whole. And I don't know. I mean, if it's the case that raising the price of pies would profit the business owners more than keeping them the same or lowering but making more pies, then it seems like it would logically be the case that they would just increase the price of pies.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is right. I mean, like the claim that the only thing that Sam was claiming there in that whole weird little mini discussion is just that the first thing that's going to happen is that the prices are raised, right? Which is literally just, again, a really straightforward kind of Econ 101 claim about supply and demand, that if like demand is outpacing supply, right? That the prices will tend to rise, right? There are more people who want to buy it than there are things to sell. Then price will tend to rise. And he even said like that's the first thing that'll happen, and then maybe like you'll generate more supply and whatever, right? But like the first thing that will happen is that prices will tend to rise, which is just obviously true. That just, I mean, like I have lots of problems with neoclassical economics, but that's not one of them, right? I mean that much is fine. Like that they. So anyway, but I want to hear the Larry Sharpe argument against Medicare for all because this sounds interesting.
All right.
I'm trying to make a realistic culture change.
I understand what you're saying.
People start seeing that there is a way that this can be better.
Adding a baker.
That is what I'm trying to achieve.
Adding somebody to help you bake pies much easier than adding a doctor in a facility. Okay, first off.
New York State law, yes, but we should change New York State law to make it easier.
I mean, I'm happy to open up immigration more and have doctors 100%. From. We can agree on that.
Look at that! I knew we'd get something to agree with, Sam. That's something. We did it.
But Larry, I'm interested in this notion that do you think there's a problem with a Medicare for all system? Aside, or I should say, it sounded like what the issue you had with that is that the oligarchs that hold sway on our system will prevent that from happening, and that's the problem with it.
I think you see it already.
So why are we giving them tax cuts? Because the way that they got to be oligarchs was because we shifted from a tax system which in the 50s and 60s taxed 90% on every dollar over what would be considered $3 million today annually. 90 cents on every dollar above $3 million in today's dollars, which kept wealth inequality relatively in check. Obviously, a lot of problems that existed in society at that time, but relatively in check. And so why do all your proposals essentially cement that problem, which you have just indicated would be the problem with Medicare? Because that's your first complaint with Medicare, that the oligarchs who run this country are going to fight you on it. I mean, I would agree with that. They do now, but it's a good idea in and of itself in terms of containing costs and saving our government and our people money.
Touch all those pieces. I'm glad you asked them, and I think I think we're agreeing on a lot of problems. I think we are. I think on the problems we're agreeing upon, and what I'm saying is, I feel like, and you can tell me I'm wrong if you like, the current system is not working. Second, if you're telling me, Larry, we need to go to Medicare for all or whatever is the big thing you want, that is such a massive change that for me running for governor, that is a fantasy. It's just not going to happen. There's just no way I could ever implement that system. There's no way it would ever work. I might just become an activist instead and just yell and scream down in Union Square if I want to. And you can do that. I'm not against you going to Union Square and screaming that if you want to. But I'm not that. I'm a candidate. So I have to come up with a plan that I think could actually work and begin to make change. And if I don't make some change, this is my biggest piece about being a third party. I understand clearly that the odds of my victory are slim. I'm not fooling myself. I get that. Can I win? Sure. Jesse Ventura did. It's absolutely possible. It happens once in a while. Maybe I'm that guy who's going to be the victor and win. Sure. Absolutely could happen. But even if I don't, if I'm able to get on a debate stage and talk about this and have this conversation with you like this, then someone else will have to have an actual plan that will work. Whether they take my plan or not, I don't care. When I was on Joe Rogan at the end of that show, Joe Rogan said, Larry, I love your plans. They're great. You should lock them down. I said, why? He said, somebody will steal them. I said, take them. I don't have to run then, do I? Take my plans, make my state better so it's not broken. So all I'm saying to you is you can disagree with all my plans if you want to. I'm the only guy talking about actual plans. The Republican says there's no problem. Democrat says more funding. Neither of those two is the option.
I think you're wrong for 2 or 3 reasons. One, I do think there are other plans.
Maybe there are, but I don't see the Democrat candidate saying them.
I mean, I think
the Republican candidate saying them.
I think we do see other plans, and if to the extent that you're constrained as a candidate on what you can go for. They, as functioning as people who could actually win, they're even more constrained in terms of what they can do. If that's an excuse as to why you would not propose Medicare for all because you're a candidate and you think you might as well be an activist if you're going to propose that, I think that you could apply that to these people who actually have a much better chance, as you said, at winning. And then I would also suggest to you that the idea of expanding a pre-existing program in this country that covers already 25% of our population, one form or another, Medicare, Medicaid, S-chip, the idea of expanding that to cover 80% of the country, 90% of the country, 100% of the country is far more likely than the idea that we're going to eliminate 11th and 12th grades in this, particularly in this state. And so
not eliminating
we're going to melt them down. We're going to eliminate public school for 11th and 12th grade.
That's true. Yep, that's accurate. Yep.
I would say that the likelihood of that happening is far less than the likelihood of us getting Medicare for all in this state. And so your excuse as to why you're not supporting it does not really pass my smell test. But yes, it is true. You do have plans.
Thank you.
The through line through them is essentially privatizing them and trusting the same corporations and private interests who are preventing us from getting things like Medicare for all. And that's what I find problematic.
No.
Yes.
I'm saying localization. Literally,
you're
you
saying
and I both said
tax cuts.
That you can't expand it, right? So you've got to make sure it's local.
Tax cuts.
Local.
Tax cuts is what you're saying.
For local people, yes.
Well, wait a minute, local people.
Yes.
Capital gains tax cuts? How many
tax cuts are local people? That's the average New Yorker. Yes.
Property
that's
tax
the
cuts.
Average New Yorker. Yes. Every one of my plans is focused on two things. Number one, stopping the bleeding of New Yorkers from the state. You can say New York State's great. I happen to love New York State as a state. I think it's a beautiful state. But clearly people don't think that. How do I know that? They're leaving in droves. They're not coming here as fast as they used to. So that's obviously, and you can call that a market or whatever you want, they're voting with their feet. They're leaving like they do tomorrow. We have more debt, more deficit, and a bigger budget. It's broken. That's for sure. And what I don't hear anyone saying is, here's how we get people to stay. I'm giving options for people to not pack up and leave. And all we talk about is more money, more spending, more money, more spending, more money, more spending, and more people leave. I want them to stay. And if you notice, before
let me ask you a question. This is your second time running, correct?
Go ahead. Yes, it is.
When was the last time you ran?
2018, 4 years ago.
Okay. When did we start losing people in this state? What year?
About 2010, give or take.
Was it 2010? Because I was looking at a graph that looked like 2017.
In that area.
It looked to me at 2017.
Is when we started not growing as fast as the rest.
Okay. So our rate of not growing as fast was in 2010, but we started losing people in droves, as you say. Well, really during COVID, but we started to lose people
COVID was a disaster
in 2017. Without a doubt. Yes. I mean, you don't want to be in fact, every state in the North, I think except for one, lost people during COVID because you want to be outside and you want it to be warm. But really, it's not the first thing in your plan, is it? I mean, the first thing in your plan that is a hallmark of every one of your plans is cutting taxes. And you and I have a disagreement as to whether, and I would agree with you. I don't think we should fund schools by property taxes.
There we go.
I think that's highly inefficient. I would raise income taxes.
I need to ask for an endorsement from you now.
I would raise income taxes and I would impose a wealth tax. And if people don't want it, they can go down to Texas and have their kids go to the public schools or go to the private schools in Texas or wherever it is that they're going to go. And that's okay. That's okay. But that's what I do. And the fact that it's a part of every one of your plans. In fact, you started on every discussion of your plan was how you finance it. And it always started with cutting taxes. And privatizing the way that we raise that money. And that's the fundamental aspect of libertarianism.
You know, libertarian, right? Saying that you expect anything else.
No, I want you to have ballot access because I think that there should be, it should be easier for third parties, 4 parties, 5 parties, whatever, to get
100%.
ballot access.
Yes.
But I do think like your ideas are would lead to a further deterioration in society. And I would suggest actually that it's really been the privatization movement, the cutting of taxes, the valuing making money via money over wage labor, which is really what we're talking about when we talk about capital gains taxes being reduced.
Sure.
All of those things have led us to where we are now with a lot of our problems. And
I would argue that in New York State, that's not the case. New York State government has grown in every way, shape, and form. Every way.
Andrew Cuomo was pretty vigorous about cutting corporate taxes and about shifting the tax burden, without a doubt. I mean, he cut
the New York Stock Exchange is considering going to what, Austin? Goldman Sachs considering going to Miami? They're all considering packing up and leaving. Wall Street, you can live on Wall Street now. It's a residential section called FIDI. What you're saying, I don't think is true. I think New York State has been putting more and more government involved in everything. Government runs all the hospitals. Government runs almost everything.
Andrew
Government
Cuomo cut
so much in New York
20%. 20% of public hospitals were cut. And that is why we can track the deaths of COVID in this state to those areas where unfunded with public hospitals.
But who's running it? Government's running it. It's my point.
No, but listen.
Government's running all of this. Everything you're mad about, government's running.
And they are doing so with less resources.
The wealth tax. You said, yes, you know what, Larry, we used to have 90% tax rate. You're right. And what did the wealthy do? They found other ways to make money and other ways to bring money in. They went around the wealth tax. That's one of the reasons why we got rid of it. There are other reasons, obviously, but one of them, they went around it. They started getting money through things like stock exchange and things like that. And that made private capital even more valuable. I would argue the powerful private capital and stock market that we have now was because of the 90% tax. That was one of the reasons. There are many, obviously, but it was one of the reasons why they went that route.
That doesn't track
they went
whatsoever,
that route for other reasons.
You know that the stock market was ascendant.
They will find another way to make their money, or they will just leave New York State.
The stock market was ascendant in the early 70s into the 70s. It exploded in the 80s
100%.
when Ronald Reagan cut the capital gains tax and cut the tax rate by almost 40%.
Ronald Reagan began it, and then Bill Clinton put the final nail in the coffin, ending Glass-Steagall. 100%.
What exactly? But so it doesn't track. How are you saying? But wait a second, Larry, you just said
government.
The reason why the stock market was ascendant. Excuse me. You just said the reason why the stock market was ascendant was because of those 90% taxes.
No, that's not what I said. I said one of the reasds why the wealthy
You didn't
went
say
there.
that.
I said one of the reasons. You said it's because. That's not what I said. I said it was one of many reasons. That was one of them.
Was it a big reason? Was it a relevant reason? Was it a significant reason?
In the 60s, I believe in the 60s and 70s, when the tax rate was so high, wealthy people were looking for the reason, and that opened up eyes towards that. It became more attractive. Just like when Glass-Steagall was ended, the idea of putting mortgages into the market became more attractive. So yes, I think it became more attractive.
What was the tax rate in those 60s and 70s?
I couldn't tell you.
It was not 90%. It would be dropped. It was dropped. That's what you're saying? No, tell me again what you're saying, because I'm getting confused.
Thinking about this back in the 50s, they were thinking, wait a minute, how do I make this money?
So it took them 20 years to build up the stock market. That's just ahistorical, Larry.
No, not to build up the stock market. No. What I'm saying is to get wealthy people to think about other ways of making money. It took them some time to start thinking about how to do that. Yes, didn't happen overnight. Of course not.
Well, the way that they did that was they waited until 1981 and Reagan began the assault on our taxes and allowed capital gains cuts. That has nothing to do with the 90% tax rate.
Nothing to do with it. Okay, fine. I'm not going to fight you on it. Fine.
Oh, that's because it's just a fact. But I don't blame you.
With it.
But
no. Then why did we just keep 90% tax rate the whole time? Let's go back to it.
What? I'm in favor of that. We did come to an agreement in the final analysis.
See that in the end, we
90% tax rate.
Do it, Sam. I knew we would. I knew we would.
Larry, this is going to be the day.
But I knew we were brothers in arms here. I knew we were.
This is going to be the day that I got a libertarian to agree with me on a 90% tax rate.
See that? Look at that. You were going
That's
to win
beautiful.
anyway.
All right, man. Well, I
Look
appreciate
at
it.
that.
Listen,
We all win.
I hope you get on the ballot, and thank you for taking the time. We held you a lot longer than we had anticipated, but I really appreciate it.
That's because it was fun. And don't forget, guys, LarrySharpe.com and Larry Sharpe on all the interweb things.
All right. Thanks, Larry. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Folks.
Yeah, I mean, this is just, I hate to be I mean, I don't know what was going on there at the end. I think it was an attempt at a joke that sort of went sideways. Obviously, Larry Sharpe doesn't support the 90% top marginal tax. Yeah, I mean, I hate to be quite this much of a broken record, but like that last part was both like clarifying and incredibly frustrating because on the one hand, it's clarifying because, I mean, I guess he said this earlier, but like the whole school thing was so convoluted. He was so obsessed with explaining how all of the like distinct details worked that this kind of got lost earlier. That what he's saying is that we're going to privatize the last 2 years of high school. There just won't be public school for like 11th and 12th grade, which was not clear to me earlier that that's what he was saying, but he seemed to be explicitly like acknowledging that right at the end with Sam. So, and it's like, okay, so all of this other stuff is kind of irrelevant, right? Because like you've got this whole song and dance about how, well, the last 2 years, people could go to trade school and, we'll pay for them to go to prep school and go to college early, whatever. And so like all of that stuff, it's like a magician, right? Look at my eye, look at my mouth, not my, not my hand. It's like all of that stuff is there. So you're not focusing on what he's actually saying, which is let's privatize the last 2 years of public school. Like let's eliminate public school for 11th to 12th grade. Instead of paying attention to that, you're all focused on, it's like, well, I mean, I guess that's okay if people would go to trade school 2 years early, whatever. And it's like, no, the real controversial thing here, which you're completely burying in all these other details, is that you want to eliminate public school for these last 2 years. And that's really where the weird disingenuity of this gets to me, because it's like, it's weird because it's not like, I could understand if you're a politician and you think you're actually going to win, right? That like you'd sort of, you'd present your plans in kind of a deceptive way. So, for the purpose of winning the election. But it's like the dude's the Libertarian Party candidate for governor. I mean, like it would be amazing if he got 3%. Like what's, I don't understand why he's, because it's like, look, clearly you want to privatize the last 2 years of education because you're generally hostile to doing these things through the public sector. And you'd be even happier, I'm sure, to privatize the last 3 years, right? Why not just say that, right? Like why disguise it and all this other stuff, or like Medicare for all? Like he's not all of this. Well, I'm running for governor of New York. Yeah, but you're not going to win. You're not going to win. Like you're doing this third party. I mean, this could only be a protest campaign or an educational campaign, right? Like, that there's no scenario by which Larry Sharpe becomes governor in November, right? I'm sure most New York voters are not familiar with him. So it's like, why not just tell us whether you'd actually support Medicare for all and not be like, well, technically I'm running for an office where this, it's like, no, come on. Like, we're just talking about what your preferences would be. None of this stuff is going to happen. Like, just tell us what your preference is. Do you support Medicare for all? I think we all know what the answer is, but why not just spell out your reasons why instead of doing all these excuses that's like, well, I'm running for governor of New York. It wouldn't actually, I wouldn't be able to do it as governor of New York. And anyway, there'd be all this resistance from rich people. And it's like, just like, if we could press the Medicare for all button, right? So like, we just had like a genie who could say, hey, enact Medicare for all. Would you, Larry Sharpe, do that? I'm pretty sure we know you wouldn't.
Right. Yeah, I think, and Sam pointed out there what you and I keep harping on, but he denied it there at the end, which is that it seems like his goal and mechanism for doing things seems to always go back to lowering taxes. And I think Sam made a good point there too, that he he said that it was basically impossible to get Medicare for all in his state, but then he Sam also pointed out that later or earlier he was talking about this thing of removing the last 2 years of high
Yeah, right.
school,
Is
which
that
is
going to
way
happen?
less likely to occur. And like you were just saying there, if you're not very likely to win anyway, why wouldn't you go for what would happen in your ideal world
Right,
if
exactly.
your principles, since you're not going to win anyway, and it's more about putting forth your own political ideology.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like this is, yeah, why not just tell us, like, in Larry Sharpe's ideal world, like, would there be any public schools, right? Like, what is it about, like, just the last 2 years? Like, is there, would there be Medicare for all again? I think we know there would not be, but, like, just say it, right? So we could argue about whether or not, about why not, right? Like, what would the tax rates be, right? Because it's like he's doing this weird thing where he presents all of this stuff almost as if he were already governor, and and he was like, "Look, man, what could I do? The legislature, this is what I can get through." Right? Like, no, you're not governor. You're never going to be governor, obviously. So all you are right now is a representative of an ideology. So, like, why not just spell out that ideology and, like, what your preferences were if you could get everything that you wanted? And I understand if, like, in the freakishly unlikely event that you become governor, you're not going to be able to get everything that you want. But, like, at least we can know what you want and decide whether or not that would be good.
Yeah. And also, in terms of Medicare for all, one thing that I don't get about libertarians and conservatives when they talk about how they're against it is that it economically ends up costing less money than the more privatized sorts of healthcare that you have in the States. Like, overall, proportionally here in Canada and other places with more socialized healthcare systems, they end up being cheaper overall, which should be kind of a libertarian argument for it in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I think
I guess maybe the problem with that from a libertarian perspective would be that it kind of relies on government authoritarianism.
no, exactly, right. So the idea would, because you're right. I mean, if the question is just how much money is being spent on healthcare by every person or entity that spends money on healthcare, then yeah, clearly Canada spends less per capita, right? Than the U.S. does, and even the Mercatus Institute, which is like a soft libertarian kind of think tank. I went to, actually, last year. I went to this event that they co-sponsored. They Mercatus Institute and the Hannah Arendt Center at Bard College co-hosted this conference where they had, like, me and another Jacobin person and a couple of libertarians for like a weekend to, like, argue about this stuff. But, like, even the Mercatus Institute, they famously did this study in, like, 2019 where Matt Brunig, we mentioned earlier, pointed this out, that if you actually look carefully at their results, they actually acknowledge that like the Bernie Sanders Medicare for All plan would save most people money, right? That it would do certainly less overall spending by everybody added all up together, right? Would be spent on healthcare with it than without it. The big thing they wanted to emphasize was this huge amount of money over the next 10 years, that was like whatever $1 trillion, whatever. People who are doing this, by the way, they always like to do it in 10-year periods that can add a zero at the end. Like, you don't want to just say, like, what's going to cost next year. You always do want to do 10 years. I always wonder why that's the convention. Why not just say, like, it's going to cost such and such amount of money over the next century, so you can add 2 zeros. But
yeah.
but like, but whatever, right? Like, the thing that's certainly true is if you're like a middle income taxpayer who can afford private health insurance, you are going to save money, right? Because if we add together like what you're currently paying in taxes plus what you're currently paying for private health insurance, that's still going to be less money than it would take for the raised taxes to pay for Medicare for all, which is true for all kinds of reasons. Cause like it has, because it's just more efficient if it's all coming from one fund. It's you don't have public healthcare programs actually have less overhead because then a bunch of private ones that are competing against each other and have like this whole layer of people whose job is to like find reasons to deny claims and all that stuff. But from a libertarian perspective, it doesn't matter, right? Because from a really hardcore libertarian perspective, it doesn't matter. But like, I'm pretty sure I know what Dave Smith would say, which would be like, okay, that's nice, but even if I accept that, maybe he wouldn't accept it. Maybe he'd try to argue that's not true. But like, I think he would say, even if I accept that, it doesn't matter because if I'm like taking money out of your wallet and then I'm doing some stuff with it and, buying you products with it, and then I'm like putting it back, maybe you'll save money from that happening as opposed to, if I never stole the money from your wallet, but that doesn't matter. I'm still stealing, right? I think that would be like the Dave Smith argument.
Yeah, yeah. They're like, he's in the camp that taxation is theft, I think, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly. Right. So it's like, I could understand that argument, right? If you think that taxation is just the worst thing ever, right? Then like, it doesn't matter if it's going to cost, if the higher taxes are still going to cost you less than the lower taxes plus the private health insurance premiums, because the private health insurance premiums are voluntary is the arguments or whatever. Like it's still, you're still not stealing. But this gets back to the big thing that I find frustrating about Larry Sharpe, because it's like, okay, great. So I understand that argument. I disagree because I don't think taxation is theft, but like, whatever, we can have an argument about that. Right. But with all of these Larry Sharpe arguments, there's this assumption that's hovering around in the background somewhere that taxes are bad. That's like informing everything else. But like,
yeah,
it never quite becomes explicit. So it's like, okay, what about that? Right. I mean, like, if it's saving you money, right, what do you care what's a tax and what's a premium? Like, again, I understand the hardcore taxation is theft response to that. And then we can get into it about that. And we can have a real discussion about that. Right. But like, if you just sort of like operate within the parameters of the assumption that taxation is bad, so less taxation is always good, and that it's bad for things to just be directly provided by the government, it's better for things to be privatized, right? Like, you're sort of operating within those assumptions, and there's always this sense, like, sometimes he'll say, I think in this debate with me, he made a couple of comments about where he used the word freedom to justify that, but like, you're not really like spelling it out. It's like, okay, spell it out for me. How are you thinking about freedom? Right. So that this would be authoritarianism and this is unfreedom if you do it that way. And then, again, we can I tried to do this, I think, in my debate with him. It's like, like actually argue about principles, be like, okay, my argument with this stuff is always like anytime you have scarce resources, any system for distributing scarce resources is always going to involve coercion, right? That like you're letting one person use it and not another person. What we're really arguing about is which distribution should be coercively enforced, not, coercion versus no coercion, right? You're really arguing about like, should you just, stop by coercion everybody from using the resources that are owned by people who inherited them? Or should you, by coercion enforce some system of taxes or nationalization or whatever, right? But it's like the coercion is kind of beside the point. And if I'm remembering right from my discussion with Larry, I think that he backed off, and now he's like, well, look, I'm not an activist, right? I'm trying to, provide solutions, like would be if I was governor. But it's like, okay, but presumably the libertarian politicians and the libertarian activists are fulfilling different roles, but in the service of the same cause, right? So like, if you're talking to somebody who doesn't think your cause is a good cause, then that seems like what the conversation should be about.
Yeah. And another interesting point that I've seen Sam Seder bring up before in debates with libertarians is that they're all about the right to private property, but the government is who dictates what the private property actually is. And especially if you're more in like the anarcho-capitalist like Dave Smith world and there's no government controlling everything, then it seems unavoidable that there would have to be some sort of other authoritarian way of how you dictate whose private property belongs to whom. That seems unavoidable.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, man, I think this was 2 years ago, because I think it was like very early in the show. So it was like almost 2 years ago. I did a debate with Walter Block, and we ended up talking a lot about this exact point that you just brought up. And I don't know. I mean, I remember thinking at the time, it's like what you're describing sounds like either feudalism or The Sopranos. That like, because you're basically, you don't have a central authority to like adjudicate things like that, right? You just have like, I guess like if you feel like your rights are being violated, you can have like a private militia enforce them. And then like the big claim that people like Walter Block are going to make is like, no, but it's not just going to be chaos all the time of private militias fighting with each other, because you'd have all these incentives to like go to like a private court to get them to settle your dispute. So it's like, yeah, you're just describing The Sopranos. That it's like, yeah, if you have a beef with another gangster, either you can fight with them or you can do a sit down and work something out, right?
Yeah. And if you have a private court system, it's just a privatized government. And if you're anti-government, it's basically the same thing as government, but it's run privately instead of publicly funded.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I guess the difference is the funding mechanism, and that like, who's enforcing it is just like, I mean, again, I guess it's like the gangsters that like you have, that like, the different gangsters who are in the conflict, I guess, will enforce the, I mean, either they feel like the terms are being honored, or else they go back to fighting again. But like, it seems like in any setup like that, yeah, you're not going to be fighting constantly, but like, there are sit downs, and there are also, and there are also gang wars, right? I mean, like, it's just going to go back and forth between the two. And that doesn't, I don't know. I guess I always think of, and yeah, there are a lot of questions. I also have a lot of questions about like, the pro-life libertarian, it's funny. We keep using Dave Smith as an example, because personally, I like the guy, but like, yeah, he is a convenient,
Yeah, I watch it. I watch his show, even though I have disagreements with some of his political arguments.
Yeah, I mean, but he is a convenient example, somebody who is all out on some of these, willing to bite some of these bullets. But like, yeah, if you're like a pro-life if you're like a pro-life anarcho-capitalist, it's like, okay, so do you have like private militias going around, busting up abortion clinics? Like, what are we talking about here?
It seems like the private militias that exist now are not very good, and are even worse than government militaries.
Well, yeah, I mean, it just seems like what they are going to be is less accountable, right? Because you don't have like as bad as like public cops can be, right? As abusive as public cops can be, at least they're theoretically controlled by people you can vote out of office, right? Whereas like if you have a private security force then they're not accountable. The only people who can fire them are whoever are paying their contract, right? So like, you know, if you're not the rich person who's paying for them, right, you have no theoretical means of holding them accountable, except I guess scraping together some money for an alternative force to fight with them. But you know, good luck.
You gotta hire the private militia that charges less and that can have worse weapons.
Yeah, all things like this, I always think of there's one of these that we did, one of the previous Sam Seder argues the Libertarian one, that were at where it's just called, if you find, I was just thinking about this, you know, connected with the Dave Smith thing, because I think actually the first thing Dave Smith said to me ever, which I think made me, you know, find him likable despite the profound political disagreements, were I went on a show the first time, you know, in studio in New York, and he, at the beginning of the conversation, he was like asking how familiar I was with his stuff. I was like, well, I watched some of your debate with Sam Seder. I didn't make it to the end. And he said, yeah, I didn't either. But yeah, one of my, I guess close out of this. I remember there's one of the other Sam Seder debates, the Libertarian. You can find this it's just called like on YouTube, Sam Seder argues with anarcho-capitalist caller, and there's like a picture, like the thumbnail is like Immortan Joe from the Mad Max Fury Road, and this guy is great. It's like a 15-minute conversation, but it's just the sort of platonic ideal of like a majority report libertarian debate, because you know, it's when Michael was still alive and it's when Jamie was still on the show. And so it's like Jamie is trying to like argue with this guy about whether, you know, he could use the word anarchist or that's reserved for leftists or something. And Sam's like, I don't care about that. Let's keep going. Right. And then like Michael keeps like bursting out laughing, and Sam's like, okay, he's being rude. Ignore him. Right. And then eventually he presses the guy, right, in Sam Seder fashion to get him to talk about how his ideal anarcho-capitalist world would work. And he keeps talking about bartering and stuff. And Sam says, well, what happens if your like street market is just bought up by some monopoly, and so you can't barter with them anymore? And he had my all-time favorite answer, which he was just like, assassination. And I think Sam just ended the debate with like, all right, cool world, bro. I really want to live in that world. That's
wow.
That sounds fun, you know, which is like, yeah, I don't, and that's also the thing, actually, I guess I said we would wrap up on this. Like, it just seems like what I like though about that guy is the honesty of it, that he'll like spell out exactly how this world he's imagining would actually work. And like, once
you mean Dave Smith?
Well, Dave Smith, I think, also gets points for honesty about this, but this caller.
Oh, you mean the guy in the debate? Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. But like, but you know, and I really wish Larry Sharpe would do the same thing, because it's like, okay, once you do that, then yeah, obviously, even in the fantastically unlikely event that Larry Sharpe somehow became governor of New York, like, yeah, I understand. We all understand, like, you wouldn't be able to just magically get your ideal world implemented in New York. Fair enough. But the real question is, like, if we get like 5% closer to your ideal world, is that going to be better or is that going to be worse? And I think spelling out what it is that we'd be getting 5% closer to is going to help answer that question. But in any case, Andrew, where can people find your stuff?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. This was a fun discussion. Yeah, people can check out my channel at Mindgasms. Mostly lately I've been doing chats about the new Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, and House of the Dragon shows. But I also do deep dive series into philosophy book like Slavoj Žižek's Less Than Nothing and Foucault's History of Sexuality. And we do chats about like fantasy and science fiction series like Stephen King's Dark Tower series and the Dune series too. And yeah, I really enjoyed my previous conversations with you as well. And hopefully we can talk again soon. We were going to talk about how one thing that anarcho-capitalists never seem to mention, and anarchists, is that there's a lot of history of left-wing anarchists who were both anti-government and anti-capitalist, like Bakunin and Kropotkin. So that would be fun as well.
Cool. That sounds good, man. All right. We are going to be back on Monday. We're going to have Micah Utrecht from Jacobin. We're going to do a remembrance of Barbara Ehrenreich, who died in the last week, and talk about some of her books. Should be a fun conversation. Also want to remind people that the very first Give Them an Argument live show, which is also the very first This is Revolution live show, and also the very first Left Reckoning live show, co-sponsored by the three shows, going to be on October 23rd in Los Angeles. We're going to have Anna Kasparian and Nando Vila and a bunch of other people there. The Ticketmaster link to get a ticket to that for anybody who's out in California or wants to come out there is in the description for this stream. So check that out. Hope to see some of you then. Left is best.